The Starlight Pavilion. If Brill had been impressed with Orbelin before he charged into battle, she would never forget the sight of him running headfirst into the exhibition hall, helmet down and lightsaber glowing. A quartet of Neil were on the other side of the doors, cramming priceless treasures into sacks. With their bulky and frankly terrifying helmets, it was difficult to see what species they belonged to, although there was no mistaking the towering lamproid with its curved neck and bony legs, each ending in a clawed pincer. Two of the six grippers had been replaced by crude mechanical claws, but all were busy looting a stand filled with ancient lightsaber hilts. "Gee!" the lamproid cried out as Orbelin charged out of the smoke. "We have company." "I see him," a masked Twi'lek with long green lekku replied, drawing twin blasters and firing on the archivist at point-blank range. "Get the others out of here, Amarant. Take everything you can." "I'm afraid I can't allow that to happen," Orbelin informed her, adding the bolts into the nearest Nihil, a human wearing a complex. The pirate dropped, smoke curling from the burns on his. Lamproid and, was that a Kitanak? Joined the assault, on their blasters into Orbelin, the bolts ricocheting away from, but somehow avoiding any of the priceless treasures scattered. "Surrender and you will live," the Jedi promised, drawing a bark of disbelief from the Twi'lek who had answered to D. The archivist didn't miss a beat. "There are many fascinating artifacts here in the exhibition. Many I see you have been trying to plunder." More bolts struck his lightsaber, not one reaching him through the whirling blade. "Although one of my favorites was noted just last night by a member of the High Council." Typical Jedi. Eve sneered, holstering her blasters to grab the glaive that was flung low on her back, the edge of its jagged blade crackling with energy. "Just doesn't know when to shut up." From her hiding place by the doors, Rill was inclined to agree as the Twi'lek lunged forward, her glaive clashing against Orbelin's lightsaber. Was this really the time for a history lesson? And yet still the archivist continued unabated, somehow managing to deflect every that came his way, all without sounding out of breath. "I go May of the smallest items." Cabin scoffed. "Into the floor to stop herself from sliding back. We'd hate to cause G mess." She sprang forward, twirling the polearm into another attack. "You are mocking me," Orbelin burbled, parrying every strike with consummate case. "This in itself is nothing unusual, but I worry that you're not seeing what's in front of your face." The archivist flicked his wrist, and Rill suddenly found herself swiveled around to face a nondescript door on the other side of the hall. That had to be the room, but her path was blocked by the lamproid and its venomous tail. Store. And all the time, the galaxy's most obstinate Ugor babbled on and on and on. "I can understand why you have discarded the tokens," he said, sweeping his lightsaber down to slice the glaive in two. "They have little monetary value." Dee threw her bisected weapon aside, drawing a pair of vicious-looking sickles that had been strapped to her legs. "Neither are they particularly beautiful, although they meant much to their original owners." Sparks flew as the curved blades tried to find a way past Orbelin's defenses. Expect Rill felt a nudge in the small of her back. T9 was still hovering above her head. It had to be Orbelin. Surely the maniac didn't hurt to get past the lamproid. She'd be dead as soon as she broke cover. The archivist sliced through the first of the sickles with ease. The metal, dense though it was, little use against a lightsaber. He hissed, lashing at the atmospheric seal of Orbelin's helmet with the other blade. The Jedi stepped back, only narrowly avoiding the blade. They were, chapter 40-3, the Rathana experimental walker. Stellan never heard the Chancellor hit the ground. He couldn't hear anything. His ears were ringing and one of his eyes had swollen shut. All he knew was that the Trandoshan was on top of him, punching down with his remaining fist, each strike loosening more of Stellan's teeth. Stellan had no idea where his lightsaber had fallen, even how to summon it. He couldn't think, couldn't breathe, couldn't function. Or, that's when he saw his master's face. Not physically, of course. Stellan could be blind, for all he knew, but Ranikant was there all the same. Her features creased with age, but kind, gentle, and so strong. Stellan wanted to go to the old woman, to throw his arms around her in a way he had never done when his master was alive. He wanted to be at peace in the way the old Jedi was at peace, one with the F in a place beyond pain, beyond duty. No, her voice seemed to say. A Jedi is never beyond duty. A Jedi shall always feel pain, the pain of those who are oppressed, the pain of the powerless not. Your time, Stellan, but I am with you. Always. Star Wars, the rising storm. But to the hilt clipped to his belt, grazed fingers wrapped around the cylinder, finding grooves molded into the leather grip by another hand, a metal stud beneath his thumb. Stellan pulled Khan's lightsaber from its clip, angled the emitter, and pressed hard. He barely heard the green blade ignite, barely smelled the flesh burning as the plasma punched through the Trandoshanian's torso and out of his back. The hits stopped coming, and the reptilian slumped to the side, breathing his last beneath his respirator. Stellan let the blade die. He wanted to rest, to let his starved lungs catch their breath, if such a thing was even possible in the Nihil fog. At least the heavy gas had risen slightly, the pungent air just a little clearer. Everything suddenly felt calm, although a thought nagged at the back of his mind, something he had forgotten, something important. The Chancellor! Stellan jumped up, his vision still blurred. He had to find Lina Soh and assess her injuries. He was no Torben Buck, but there would be something he could do, unless he was already too late. Very stumbled forward, his free hand stretched out in front of him, he pain in his head stopping him from using the force. There was chance he had a concussion, but he would have to deal with that Tur. He stumbled, realizing to his horror that he'd kicked Quo, who was still lying on the ground, passed out from the pain from his leg. Where was the Chancellor? Where was Lina Soh? Chancellor? Stellan croaked, and he was rewarded by a shout. Her hysterics forgotten, all reaching down to help Hall So to working together to save a life. Safety, the spirit of unity. Stellan gripped Khan's lightsaber, drawing on its strength, feeling her presence. He raised his other hand and called on the Force once again, cushioning So's body, pushing up just enough so the others could grab her arms, her dress, anything to get her on board. She's safe, the Regassa called down. We have her. Relief flooded through him, so potent that his legs nearly buckled, and yet the fight wasn't over. He was hurt, he was bleeding, but he could not give up. Something moved in the smog. Stellan whirled around, dizziness overtaking him for a moment. He steadied himself, muttering beneath his breath. The Force is with me. The Force is strong. Whatever was coming, he had to be prepared. The mantra would help. Already he could feel strength creeping back into his limbs, clearing the fog in his head, if not in the atmosphere all around. The Force is with me. The Force is strong. This was his duty, his calling. He would not stop until everyone on the walker was safe. The Force is with me. The Force is strong. Stellan's lightsaber shot out of the smoke to his left, finding his open hand. He held Khan's hilt tight, igniting both blades at once, and stood, ready to defend them all. The shadows in the fog solidified into three shapes running toward him. Stellan tensed as Materi and Varu bounded out of the cloud, followed by a familiar flash of red. Raiders' oral assault. At least, the few foolish enough to take on a couple of angry Targans. The Targans were nuzzling Quo, who was lying worryingly still. Stellan holstered his lightsabers and jogged over to the aid, Maramis running behind him, the guard glancing up at the walker, which was once again shrouded in fog. What happened? The Regassa. It's safe and brave beyond measure. I could have told you that. The Targons parted to let Stellan kneel beside Quo. He checked Kurivar's pulse, finding it weak but steady. He'd gone into shock. That break looks bad. It is. We need to get him up to the others. Wrecked. Stellan didn't have time to get into all that right now. He pointed in the direction of the Trandoshan he'd killed. There's a Nihil over there. He had a shield. Please, Stellan said, trying not to get frustrated. Just do as I say. Maramis complied, returning with the armaments, which he threw to the ground, along with a bandolier filled with vials. They're all wearing them, the guard captain explained, pointing out a needle connected to the contraption. This was connected to a shunt in the Trandoshan's remaining arm. I think there's stims to keep the brutes fighting even when injured. Cavan Scott. Now for this, Stellan said, turning the shield pommel side down beside the aide. It looked roughly the right size. The right size for what? Maramis commented, and Stellan realized that he must have been talking out loud. Maybe his head injury was worse than he'd imagined. Lord Jedi? Force. Lift. Stellan didn't respond. Instead, he reached out with the Ing-Quo as gently as he could onto the shield. Like the splint, the makeshift stretcher wasn't ideal, but it would allow them to move Quo without inflicting more damage. Hopefully. Placing the bandolier of drugs on Quo's chest, Stellan quieted his mind as much as was possible. He raised both his hands, and the shield rose haltingly with them. The effort made Stellan want to throw up, but he knew he had to remain strong. If his concentration wavered even for a moment, Quo would come crashing down for a second time, and no amount of Neil's stims would help him. Stellan pushed up, feeling the shield rise into the haze. That's it, the voice called down from above. The Chancellor, safe from her ordeal. You're doing it, Stellan. We nearly have him. Keep going. Stellan focused on her words and the encouragement of the Och survivors who leaned out to grab the shield as it came into reach, leading Quo over the edge and onto the platform. Stellan waited, not releasing his influence until he was sure that aid wouldn't roll from the shield, not until he'd heard that Quo was safe on board. Then, and only then, did he relax, his knees buckling, pitched forward, Maramis rushing to catch him before he fell. Stellan, we get it upright? Maramis asked, running over to the tar. Stellan looked over to see Matari already doing exactly that, scaling Hiwalker's leg as if it were a pinnock tree on the Targan's native world. Worse or not, there was no way he could do that. He doubted he could manage a jump right now. Stairs it is, he agreed, helping Maramis haul them back up. They are heavier than expected, but Stellan had enough strength left to call the force to help. The steps clanged into place, and they shoved him as close as they could get to the side of the walker. With a blood-curdling scream, more Nihil burst from the cloud, UBS and axes raised. Maramis drew his own weapon, taking down O of the raiders with a succession of blasts from his Kiavin. What are you waiting for? The captain yelled, taking out a third. Move! Stellan wasn't stubborn enough to argue. Jedi or not, Maramis was better conditioned than he was, as became painfully apparent when he's forced to grab hold of the stairs railing to haul himself up to the top roker. The structure shook worryingly, but he made it to the Folsa Ellerek, helping him over the edge. The second of the Targons wing him. Then it was Maramis's turn, racing up the stairs, ignoring Cavan Scott. Stellan staggered to the front, ignoring the scream of the Neil, who found himself under one of the walker's feet as they lumbered forward. I didn't know you knew how to pilot one of these things, he to Lena so as he reached the cockpit. Neither did I, he admitted, peering into the smog, which thanked. Fully was a little thinner this high up. So where we go? Forward, Stellan said, pointing in the direction he hoped was Valo's temple outpost. Always forward. Chapter 44. The Innovator. Let's go and see the Innovator on our own, he'd said. I can get us in, he'd said. No one will miss us. What an idiot. Hip, take my hand. Dom reached down to Kidrep, ready to pull him up a stairwell that was now leaning the wrong way. It had gotten so that they couldn't tell what was floor, wall, or ceiling, Not that it mattered as long as they got out before the ship sank. Kip's fingers found John's wrist, and the boy heaved, Kip grabbing the banister with the other hand to steady himself. Behind him, the Quarren they had found wandering the corridors alone wheezed wretchedly. Kip looked back, worried about the old guy. He was going downhill fast, the nasty gash across his left eye still bleeding. Kip had spotted him with a woman back on the viewing platform, but now he was alone, and there was no mistaking the tears in the Quarren's eyes. The only thing they knew about him was his name and the fact he was finding it hard to breathe. NWO? John called down. Do you need a hand? He doesn't speak basic, Kip reminded the mayor's son, climbing back the way he'd come to help. Luckily for all of them, Quarrenese was just one of the many languages his mom had insisted that he learned. Not far now, he said to the old-timer, only for the Quarren to shake his head bleakly. Leave me? No way. We stick together, it wouldn't be difficult. There were only 4 of them after all, just Kip, John, NWO, and Lisa, the human fare attendant who had gotten off the platform when the Neil attacked. Let me get behind you, Kip said, maneuvering himself around the Quarren. Give you a leg up? Still grumbling, NWO allowed himself to be pushed up the stairwell, John grabbing the Quarren's waterlogged robes. But where are we going? NWO burbled when they reached the top. It was a good question. He turned to Lisa, who was consulting a cracked datapad. Where now? The woman dragged a finger across the map on the display, rotating the device to make sense of their location. This way, she said, in an accent that Kip didn't recognize. She was pointing to a half-closed door that had stalled on its runners. John pushed on ahead and tried to open it, muscles bunching under his wet shirt. It's moving, he reported through gritted teeth. Lisa slipped the datapad in her waistband and went to help, pulling where John was pushing. Kip joined them while NWO leaned heavily on the wall, catching his breath. The door creaked on its runners. That's it, John said. It's beginning to give, and give it did, in spectacular fashion, sliding suddenly back as if freshly oiled. Lisa let go, but Kip and John were carried forward by the Star Wars The Rising Storm 277 sudden movement, landing in a heap on the floor, a mess of tangled arms and legs. Look out, John said, grabbing Kip tight before he could tumble back down the stairs. Kip clung to the Valon, the boy's body firm against his own. He'd spent the previous night fantasizing about what it would be like to hold John so close. But now wasn't the moment to make good on his dreams. The pair disengaged, scrambling up their feet just as Lisa disappeared through the now open door. This way! They followed her as she tracked their location on the map, turning first one way and then another. Kip had no idea where they were heading, but had little choice but to trust the woman as she led them down groaning passages, beneath pipes that had crashed through broken ceilings and over-toppled equipment. NWO slipped when navigating what looked like a vending machine, sucking in breath through his fronds as his foot caught in the twisted chassis. Kip and John helped him after that, his arms thrown around their necks as he half-hobbled, half-hopped after the attendant. Are you sure you know where you're going? John asked. No, came the honest reply. But if I'm reading this correctly, we're on deck 6. There's a shuttle bay 3 decks down, which I think we should be able to get to via a turbolift up ahead. What good will a shuttle bay do us? Kip asked. John had worked it out. If there's a shuttle, we might be able to open the bay doors and escape. If the doors aren't underwater, you're a little ray of starlight, aren't you? John teased. Kip tried the shuttle should still be. I don't think you're supposed to use lifts in emergencies, Kip said, slipping from beneath NWO's arm. I doubt it's working, Lisa admitted, flipping open an access panel to reveal a lever. She yanked down, the doors unlocking to reveal an empty shaft complete with a ladder and a bottomless drop. This thing has a light on it, Lisa said, finding a control in the datapad. A tiny bulb flicked on, dazzling Kip for a moment as she tucked the unit, bulb side out, into her belt. I'll go first, John said, swinging over to the ladder. What about NWO? I will manage, the Quarren said in his own language, having picked up the meaning of Kip's question. You go first. Are you sure? Kip asked in Quarrenese, and even though NWO nodded, he could tell by the quiver of his tentacles that the Quarren was anything but. That makes two of us, Kip thought, reaching across for the ladder. The rungs were wet, water running down the shaft from above, and Kip's arms and legs soon began to ache as he started his descent. NWO struggling step by step above him, followed by Lisa. They made their way in silence, Kip's breath sounding far too loud as he groped for with his feet, too scared to look down. He was sure he was going to slip, but managed to hang on as they passed Deck 4's closed doors. Next rung. Just one more to go, Lisa encouraged, although it turned out not to be that easy. We've got a problem, John called up. Just the one? Kip retorted, finally looking down to see what H was talking about. It was a problem, all right. The shaft had filled with water, forcing John to a halt. How much farther to the next doors? The Bellon asked. Uma down from above. It can't buff. Is there a way to open the doors from in here? John asked. Yes, Lisa told him. There should be a lever like the one I used before. Throw the lock and you should be able to yank the doors. Even underwater? Kip asked. I guess. That didn't sound reassuring. What are you talking about? NWO rumbled. Kip translated for the Quarren, who sighed deeply. I shall swim down to open the doors. You can't. You're not strong enough. I'm as strong as a keel canna, NWO claimed, puffing out his chest before collapsing into a coughing fit. Is this a private argument, or can anyone join in? John asked. He said he can swim down there. Not in that condition he can't. Hence the quarrel with the Quarren. Lucky for you guys. I've been swimming in this lake since I was knee-high to a beta grub. Time I took another dip, before Kip could stop him, the Valon took a deep breath and plunged down into the water. He'll be fine, Lisa said. But Kip wasn't sure. Neither did he know whether he should drop into the water to help. He'd never been a strong swimmer, and the thought made his stomach flip, but if John Trouble got into it first small and then larger, Kip reeled. Bubbles broke on the surface, breath, especially when the sudden flurry 11. The water dropped away, Lisa, peering as it drained through a set of open doors, weak emergency lighting illuminating the shaft. A head appeared through the doors, ginger hair dripping wet. Well, John said, grinning up at Kip. You waiting for an official invitation? They clambered down, John helping them swing into the corridor, which like the rest of the ship was lifting to the side. NWO's wheezing had gotten worse than ever, but even he leapt forward to make a grab for Lisa as the vessel suddenly lurched and she lost her footing. We've got you, Kip said as they pulled her from the shaft, but nothing could stop the datapad from tumbling from her waistband to plop into the water that had settled beneath the open doors. Please tell me you don't need me to go after that? John asked, peering into the murky liquid. No need, Lisa said, steadying herself on the wall to stop herself from slipping. The shuttle bay's down here. Luckily, they didn't have to go far, but that didn't stop NWO from taking a tumble or two, each fall prompting Kip to wonder if the old-timer would make it back to his feet again. Not far now, Lisa promised as they rounded a corner, finding that the shuttle bay itself was in a worse state than NWO. Barrels and containers had tumbled from one side of the hangar to the other, collecting on the far wall, cables hanging from a ceiling that looked dangerously close to collapse. But there was one glimmer of hope in the shape of a sublight shuttle that had slipped with the barrels, but looked like it was still in one piece. The hatch is open, Lisa called as she clambered aboard. Is it dry? John asked, as a Chactyl night lights flashed on within the cabin. NW. What is it? Asked John, noticing her expression. We may have power, but the hangar bay doesn't. She peered through the shuttle's transparent steel viewport at the huge double doors that would usually lead out into the vacuum of our jammed shut. Space. Those things dropping into the co-pilot seat. And Kip turned to climb back outside. Where are you going? He turned back to John. There must be a manual control, like in the lift shaft. I don't like the idea of pulling those back by hand, John admitted. Not with a lake on the other side. Does this thing have weapons? John asked. Lisa checked her readout. I think so. The bare minimum, at least. Simple lasers, nothing more. She continued to check controls. There's only one way to find out, but the real problem comes when we make it out. Kip's heart sank. You don't know how to fly. Not in the slightest. I'm great at turning on power, and not at all bad when it comes to identifying systems, but getting us back to the surface? Well, that's a very different matter. Dom swore. Even without fully understanding him, the attendant moved aside, letting the Quarren flop into the flight seat. Oh, for the love of Dak, move aside. They all turned at the sudden outburst of Quarrenese to see NWO heaving himself toward Lisa, his wrinkled hand flapping her away. Go on, scoot, scoot. You're a pilot? Kip asked. Used to be a pilot, but they can't have changed things too much. NWO started flipping switches with his webbed fingers, and the engines hummed, as did the comm, a voice crackling over the line. This is Vam Targes, the designer of this vessel. I am attempting to jettison the main processor, which contains vital research about the hyperspace anomalies the Nihil seem to be using. The flight deck is rapidly filling with water, and the sound of an explosion boomed over the speakers, which would have been worrying enough if the hangar bay didn't suddenly lurch backward. They all screamed, grabbing hold of anything they could as the shuttle shifted, sliding toward the back wall. There was an almighty crack as the bay's ceiling finally gave way, water cascading from above. Something very large and very loud struck the top of them, the shuttle ceiling bowing. They jolted to a halt, John craning his neck to peer up. We're caught beneath a beam. What kind of beam? Kip asked. The kind that would need a dozen Wookiees to shift. The hangar bay was filling fast, the water level already halfway up the viewport. Do you think the ship's gone under the lake? Kip asked. There's no way to know, Lisa said. But it's likely. Then what are we going to do? John whined. Hold on to something, NWO burbled, firing the engines. The shuttle shook more violently than ever, and for a split second there was a terrible scraping noise as it tried to break free of the beam. It's no good. We're stuck, Kip said, leaping up and opening the hatch. What are you doing? John shouted over the engines. How I compare to a dozen Wookiees. And Lisa scrambled after him, but it was useless. Try as they was no way they could lift the beam. They were wedged. Tight, maybe there's cutting equipment in the shuttle? Dom suggested. Even if we worked out how to use it, would we have time to cut through the metal? Kip asked, before deciding not to waste more time by waiting for an answer. Never mind, I'll go look. He started toward the hatch, but slipped on the wet roof, sliding over the edge. Taking a deep breath, he closed his eyes and waited for the cold water to hit him. Instead, he found himself floating in midair, arms whirling. Try to remain calm, came a voice from above. Kip twisted around as he was lifted back to the top and saw a figure looking down from the deck above, one hand holding himself steady while the other traced Kip's journey back to safety. The Padawan leapt down to join them, landing with impossible grace. No need. Bell drew his lightsaber, the green blade igniting. Get back aboard. Eyes. Kip wiped water from his. Let the Force worry about me. Go. What about you? Down to. You heard what he said. He's a Jedi commit suicide? No, Bell's voice shouted from outside. Is everyone ready? Kip told NWO what he thought Bell was planning, and the Quarren nodded. Yeah. We're good to go. Then hold on tight. There was a hiss, and sparks rained down onto the viewport. Kip winced, but the transparisteel didn't crack, at least for now. The sound of screeching metal stopped, and Bell's footsteps clanged over their heads as he crossed to the other side of the shuttle. He gave a muffled sound, but they couldn't make it out over the noise of the water. What did you say? Kip yelled. I cut through the beam, on the right-hand side. came the reply. The water had reached the top of the viewport now. They thought Bell said that he was going to start at the other end, but it was too difficult to make out. Ready the cannons, NWO burbled at Jom, who looked at him none the wiser. The lasers, Kip translated. In front of you, Lisa added. Where? Jom asked, his voice going up at least 2 octaves. The sound of putting started again. Here and here, NWO said, leaning over and jabbing buttons. The bay doors appeared on a tactical display in front of Jom, a red target overlying the image. Old lad. Just press this when I say yes, NWO said, and this time Jom got the meaning. That's how we fire the weapons, yeah? Pew pew? Yes, weapons, NWO confirmed, adding a pew in basic to underline the point. He's got to be nearly finished, Lisa said. NWO primed the engines, placing a hand on the thruster control. Not yet, Kip urged, but NWO wasn't willing to wait. The water had completely covered the window now, and there was a sudden crack. Was that the transparent steel finally giving way? Yes, now, NWO said, pulling back the lever before Bell had finished cutting. Kip cried out to wait, but his shout was lost in the sound of tearing metal as the shuttle shot forward. Fire! NWO barked in basic, grappling with the flight yoke as the shuttle barreled toward the doors. Pew! Pew! Jom pressed the trigger, and there was a blinding flash of light, followed by a tsunami of water as the doors disintegrated. NWO shouted something else, but Kip didn't hear what it was. He was too busy trying to grab hold of a chair. There was another crack, and water started to spray through a now very obvious crack in the viewport. Kip couldn't see where they were heading, or even if they were out of the innovator. But seconds later, the water stopped pouring in, and the gloom was replaced by smoke-filled skies. Jom punched the air while Kip fought not to be sick as NWO brought the shuttle around sharply, heading back toward the harbor. There was no sign of the innovator, and the park itself was shrouded in a thigh-yellow fog that clung to the ground. There were fires and their W explosions, starfighters dancing around one another above them. Key sky islands were gone, as were most of the pavilions, downed air sea burning on the dock, bodies strewn in all directions. My mom's somewhere in there, Kip said quietly as NWO browed the nose of the shuttle down. We're going in too, Fist, Lisa cried, but NWO just yelled at TH. The shuttle hit the ground and screeched to a juddering stop, throwing them against their restraints. Kip looked up, surprised to still be alive. Jom was already out of his seat, opening the hatch. Is it safe? Kip asked. Better than in here. We don't know if this thing is going to blow. They stumbled out, Kip helping NWO even though he wanted to scream at the selfish old fool for leaving Bell behind. Outside, the air was rank, screams and explosions drowned out by what sounded like a madman's definition of music. Kip choked on the foul stench, his legs buckled, taking NWO down with him. Jom was beside them in a second, checking that they were all right. Of course we're not, Kip spluttered, pushing Jom aside. We just left the Jedi to drown on a sinking ship. Jom looked wounded at the anger in Kip's voice. I know. He was one of the good guys, Jom. Tell me, what does that make us? As if in answer, a dog barked somewhere in front of them. Kip looked up to see a gray and orange hound running toward them full pelt. Bell's hound. Did she know what they had done? Was she about to take revenge for abandoning her master? Matari and Voru certainly would to anyone who had done the same to his mother. He held up an arm to protect himself, but the dog shot past, bounding up the side of the wrecked shuttle. Kip's mouth dropped open as he saw Ember leap into the arms of a figure sprawled on the shuttle's sloping roof, a figure in drenched Jedi robes. Hell! Kip shouted, scrambling back to his feet and running to the shuttle. You made it! I told you the Force would take care of me, the Jedi said, trying to stop the Charhound from licking him to death. Although hanging on wasn't fun as he took out the doors. Yeah, about that, Jom began, shamefaced. Bell jumped down from the shuttle, Ember bounding after him. We got out. That's the important thing. although I'm afraid my lightsaber went down with the ship. That's a shame, Lisa said. I think we're going to need it. I've got to find my mom, Kip blurted out, and Bell laid a supportive hand on his shoulder. We will, if we stick together. Something caught Bell's eye, and he smiled. All of us. Behind. Kip turned to see a Pantoran woman and a pair of bedraggled Cyclorians helping a wounded human in a tattered attendant uniform. Dennis, Lisa said, recognizing the man. Are you? I'll live, the man replied, smiling wearily at the Jedi. Thanks to Bell. It's good to see you again, kid. You too, Bell replied, although this really isn't the place for a reunion. I hope you're ready. For what? Bell turned to face the Nihil cloud. Getting off the ship was easy. Now comes the real challenge. Do it in style, so much the better. Someone is looking. Chapter 49. The Unity Arc. Not for the first time, Stellan wished that Avar were here. Her talents would have helped so much, there would have been no unique need for comms at all. He dreaded to think how much bloodshed could have been avoided. But what he did have was some of the finest Jedi he had ever served with, and others whom he knew were about to prove their mettle. He had faith in them. He had faith in the Force. We need to lift the cloud. So far, so blindingly obvious. Each of us can push back the fog to a limited degree. Stellan smiled, even though his bruised face hurt like the blazes. Bell was already ahead of him. That Padawan was good. More unified meditation? Asked Stokes over the comm. Maybe not even that coordinated. My old master used to tell me to keep things simple. She was a wise woman, Porter Engle grunted, the sound of his humming lightsaber buzzing over the connection. Was the Ikruki in the middle of a fight? The Chagrians impatient. All at once, the various Jedi signaled that they were good. On 3, push toward the lake. 1, 2, 3, they all said in unison. Elzar pushed out with the Force, feeling his fellow Jedi doing the same, some near, some far. The sensation was dizzying, just as it had been when he joined Avar's chorus above Hetzal Prime all those months ago. Together they could achieve anything. He had known it before, but it was confirmed again. The war cloud rolled away as if blown by a great wind, and it didn't stop. The other Jedi pushing out from where they stood, the fog lifting all across the park and out into the city. All at once they could see, as could the thousands of scared survivors, as could the enemy. Lorna, what's happening? Dan sat forward in his command lounger, peering at the screen. What was the damn woman doing down there? It was bad enough TH communications on the planet had been restored, but now the WA cloud was dissipating in front of his eyes. 20. Lorna, he yelled into his comm. Can you hear me? Are you Goody Lima here? Why? There was nothing. No reply at all. On screen, he saw Nihil Sta dumbstruck, surprised by their sudden unveiling. There was F devastation, that was for sure, and a hell of a lot of bodies, but Nihil had lost their advantage. Now the Jedi could see. Prepare the death charges, Pan snapped at his crew. If Lou Empest can't do their job on the ground, we'll raise the damn PLOM in the skies. Thank the Force for that, Indira thought, as she reduced another of the Nihil's infernal speakers with a careful shot from her Vector's laser cannons. Throwing the ship into a spin, she targeted the next spiked probe and sent it the same way before turning her attention to a Nihil marauder that was zeroing in on a civilian ship that had taken off when the war cloud had lifted. She took no pleasure in denying the pirate its life, but was happy to the cruiser continue on its way, safe from attack. The people they had saved now safely deposited on the ground. Indira's drift had returned to the air and were fighting alongside the last of the Republic pilots, trying to put Mikhail's passing from their mind. There had been so much lost today, But Mikhail was a part of them all now. He was still in the fight, and always would be. Flodarilo sub. A pair of thermal missiles streaked toward her. She jerked to the left, the vector responding perfectly. The missile streaked past her wings, straight into the Nihil raider that had picked up her tail. Destroyed by their own ordnance. The universe brought its own justice with or without the Jedi. She flew straight at the fighter that had unloaded its missile launchers at her. The pilot was firing wildly, laser bolts zipping past her. She didn't flinch, and she didn't respond, not until she knew her own weapons were in range. When her shot came, it was clear and clinical, the fighter blossoming into flames. Indira had to admit she was impressed in a funny sort of way. Once Stellan's plan had dissipated the smoke, the uncovered Nihil had frozen for a split second, but their stunned silence hadn't lasted long, replaced by more blood-curdling war cries over the thud of their damn music, if Nuo word was appropriate. It had rejoined the battle, would grow back in its place, but whatever the odds, the Jedi would never stand down. Not now, not ever. Indira grunted as her vector took a hit from behind. She glanced over her shoulder, seeing smoke billowing from her tail. Another Nihil fighter was right behind her. The last strike had been a glancing blow, causing little damage, but the next might rupture her fuel reserves. Unless she took a leaf out of the Nihil's book. You guys like smoke, right? She flicked the switch, activating the second canister of dye that she'd been carrying since the opening ceremony. Red vapor flowed out of her exhaust, billowing over the Nihil, blinding its pilot. And yet her grin fell away as she realized that the Marauder hadn't fallen away. Whoever was behind the stake was good, staying on her no matter how she weaved and rolled. The smokescreen hadn't stopped them, and Nysher did the G-inducing climb she pulled in the hope that the Nihil's aircraft would stall. Instead, the Nihil climbed with her, higher and higher, sending salvo after salvo across her tail, each volley nearer than he last. She made one last turn, but still the Nihil stuck to her like null sealant. She felt the Marauder's crosshairs lock onto her and feared herself for the blast that would tear the vector apart. The blast never came. Indira swiveled in her seat, looking back to see a gigantic winged reacher soar behind her, the mangled remains of the Nihil's cockpit in its jaws. She laughed out loud as she saw who was hunched on the Anvil's back, robes blowing in the wind. Elzar Mann was riding a dragon into the middle of a dogfight. Because who else would it be? The skies above Valo. They were winning. Stellan's plan to clear the war cloud had worked, just as Elzar knew it would the moment he'd heard his friend's voice come over the comlink. He hadn't been able to respond personally. He was too busy trying not to get thrown off the back of a bucking sandball as he and Ty took to the air. His mount was feisty but flew straight into combat without complaint. The Nihil didn't know what hit them. Those who weren't knocked out of the sky with a flick of the sandball's tail soon found themselves staring down its gullet, the dragon's teeth making short work of their canopies. The Jedi vector they'd rescued waggled its wings in, thanks before ooming off. Elzar had no idea who was behind the controls, but was glad they had survived to fight another day. He patted the sandball's hide, feeling freer than he had in months, his ad finally clear. All the disappointment and frustration were gone. He couldn't forget what he'd done earlier that day, but he'd start to ache amends. Med Indy. And hey, if he could do it in style, so much the better. Someone is looking happier, a voice crackled over a comlink. Right back at you, he yelled into the comm. Swooped in on the back rush of air. How many have you taken down so far? She called over as their mounts came alongside each other. It's not a competition. You do remember I've seen inside your head, right? He was about to respond when laser bolts tore between them. He craned around to see a single-seater Nihil fighter attempting to bring down a Skyhawk. Ty didn't wait. With a cry, she brought her sandval around and dropped on the Marauder like a hawk, the reptile biting clean through the Nihil's wing. The fighter spun to the ground, smashing into an already wrecked pavilion, its pilot dying instantly. Tai whooped in triumph, reminding Elzar how different they were. She may have been trained as a Jedi, but she'd wandered far from the path. Perhaps this was the reason they'd been brought together. Part of his atonement. If he could show her the way, it should be. He scanned the ground below him, finding the perfect opportunity. A Nihil speeder bike was bearing down on a blood-soaked Krolut who was running for his life. The saggy-skinned amphibian wouldn't get far, not at the rate the speeder was traveling, its outriggers tipped with pointed bayonets that would impale the runner in seconds. Luckily for the Krolut, Elzar's Sanval was faster. He urged the dragon into a dive, and the beast opened its maw wide, ready to swallow the Nihil whole. No, not like that, girl, Elzar thought. There's been enough death. The creature's jaws snapped shut, and instead the Sanval skimmed out, pushing what was left of the war cloud aside with the beat of her wings. The Nihil twisted in their saddle, their eyes widening behind grease-smeared goggles as the Sanval closed the gap. With a swing of ER-scaled head, the Sanval thwacked the Nihil from their perch, the pilotless vehicle rolling straight for the Krolut. The amphibian. Over them, guided by a helpful nudge from Elzar. Nearby, the grounded Nihil watched their bike explode against a wall and, snatching a blaster from their belt, prepared to take their revenge against the helpless Krolut. Typical bully, Elzar thought as he brought the Sanval back up, too scared to pick on someone your own size. He probably shouldn't have enjoyed the dragon flicking the Nihil shooter into the air with the tip of her tail, but was sure the Force would forgive him in the long run, especially as it would be a lesson to Tai that she didn't always have to kill. There was no sign of the Thalothian as they climbed back into the sky. In fact, the air was remarkably clear, not only of the noxious gas, but of the Nihil forces as a whole. Was the attack over? Had the tide finally turned? Elzar glanced up and realized that the answer to both questions was a definite no. Chapter 50-1. Fair Park, Valo. The force of the first explosion knocked Lourna Dee from her feet, aggravating the injuries she had endured when that damn Jedi had thrown her through the roof. Her shoulder had been dislocated, and, although she had rammed it back into place, was still raging with pain, as were the ribs that were obviously broken. The fact she could still run was a minor miracle, as was the fact that her skull was still in one piece. The last thing she needed was to be vaporized by one of her own bloody bombs. Lourna pushed herself up, crying out as bones grated together. The plan had been clear since the beginning. The raid would end with a carpet bombing, the charges dropped from the edge of Valo's atmosphere, one final indignity. But only when her tempest was clear. Han? Han! She screamed into her comlink as she forced herself on. Can you hear me? The comm came apart in her hands, damaged beyond repair in her fall. Lourna threw it aside in disgust, spotting 3 of her own Tempests running for cover as the bombs continued to fall. You 3, wait! The Nihil brought their weapons up, surprised by her shout. The largest of the trio, a maskless Elzarian with scales the color of pus, unleashing his flamethrower in her direction. Lourna leapt over the stream of ignited conflagrin, the pain in her shoulder almost worth it for the satisfaction of loosening the reptilian's jaw with the heel of her boot. The other 2, Nihil didn't recognize her without her mask. They sure as hell recognized the brutality of the kick. The Elzarian thudded to the ground, blood gushing from his ruined mouth. Lourna reached down and snatched 2 of the syringes that were strung through the idiot bandolier. The first she punched into her own arm, the second she slammed into the Elzarian's broad back. He provoked her wrath, but she still needed the horned brute on his feet, even with a jaw that was hanging loose. Mayhap, you have a tip nearby? She barked at the 2 Nihil, who could still talk, a bear of a human, wielding a large plasmol, and a female Wike who glared at Lourna with venom. Well? The Wike pointed at a junker on the other side of the debris-strewn park. It was ugly, but it would do until Lourna got back to her own cruiser. For now, though, Lorna wasn't looking at the ship. She was looking at what was in front of it. Who was in front of it in all her finery? Suddenly, the indignity Lorna had suffered at the hands of the idiot Jedi in the containment suit seemed worth it. Even the bomb seemed easier to forgive. Here was her prize. Lorna held out her hand for the plasmol, not expecting to have to ask. To his credit, the human handed over his weapon without question, flexing his knuckles in anticipation of the fight ahead. Lorna tested the maul's weight, activating the energy field that covered the hammer's blunt heel. Yes, that would do nicely. Her course set, Lorna D broke into a run, 4 simple words reverberating around her head. Chapter 52. The Unity Arc. The bombs had been a surprise that even the Force hadn't warned them about. Ragasa, we must get you away from here, Maramis told his queen, who was helping Madame Cancera carry a wounded Forcial from the wrecked building, its long gray hair matted with blood. Supreme Huntress didn't look much better, once glittering robes soiled with gore from the victims, her regal face streaked with dirt. We must help, she said as the ground shook from another explosion. No, the captain's right. Chancellor So joined them, similarly disarrayed. The hem of her long dress ripped and torn where she had used the material for bandages. What you have done is beyond our expectations, Ragasa. But my duty now must be to get you to safety. Don't you agree, council member? Maramis looked at Stellan expectantly as the Chancellor addressed him. Of course he concurred. The bombing was proof that the danger was far from over. Would these devils never stop? As if to answer his question, long-range lasers lanced down from above, carving deep fissures into the ground. They swept toward the wrecked building, vaporizing anyone in their path. Into the walker, Stellan shouted. Elorek Yovit looked around in despair. But the wounded. Take who you can, Stellan told her, drawing his lightsaber. I'll protect those who are too injured to move. The sound of running boots broke the moment. Stellan turned to see a small band of Nihil charging at them, led by a Twi'lek with death in her eyes and a plasmol burning in her hands. Maramis let loose a volley of blasts from his Kievany, hitting one of the Nihil in the shoulder. The brute, an unmasked Alzarian with a slack jaw, spun with the force of the blow but somehow stayed on his feet. It's their erected drugs, Maramis snapped, as the Chancellor ushered everyone who could walk onto the walker. The Talagrid don't know when to lie down and die. Stellan didn't recognize the Togruti word, but could guess its meaning. We're all on board, So shouted down from the walker. Stellan reached for Khan's saber, igniting both weapons. Go, Captain. Get as many as you can to safety. The Togruta hesitated for a minute before running to join his queen. But they weren't leaving Stellan alone to face the Nihil. The Chancellor's voice rang out from where she had taken up the controls her. Captain Scott. The Targons obeyed their mistress without question, bounding from the walker to stand by Stellan, Matari to his left, Voru to his right. Stellan didn't look to the Chancellor to thank her, or to see the experimental walker start to rise, but he was pleased to have the animals with him. With the Targons by his side, he just might survive the day. Elzar's Sandval keened as a laser bolt almost punched its way through her wing. Steady, girl, Elzar urged his mount, not taking his eyes off a vector that was trying to shake off not one but 2 marauders. He could tell from the flight pattern that the pilot was inexperienced. The Wookiee? Bariaga? It could be, and there was no sign of Nib. Force willing she was still airborne, but even if she was, the Padawan needed help now. Burry was slewing left and right, doing his best to avoid being shot down, but could neither fake his assailants, nor double back to go on the offensive. Time to even the score. Get me nearer. Elzar reached for his lightsaber as the Sandval's wings beat faster, pushing them toward the skirmish. That's it. That's it. He lit the blade, just a little closer. A bomb whistled past them from above, the shock causing the Sandval to buck in the air, nearly throwing Elzar from her back. He pressed an open palm against the beast's neck. Steady, girl, steady. The sandball calmed, sweeping nearer to the firefight. Nearer, nearer, just near enough. Elzar drew back his arm and threw the lightsaber with all his might. The blade pinwheeled through the air like a plasma disc, Elzar guiding its flight so it dipped down into the path of the first fighter. The Nihil had no time to pull up. His mount howled in triumph as the spinning blade sliced through the fighter like a circular saw, the marauder bursting into flames as plasma met fuel. The Sandval pulled up to sweep over the explosion, Elzar calling out in the force to draw the now extinguished hilt back to him. He glanced down at the weapon, gratified that it showed no signs of damage, although the same couldn't be said for the second Nihil fighter, who suddenly found itself peppered by bolts from Buriaga's cannons. The Wookiee peeled away to find his master, although Elzar could feel the Padawan's gratitude and prepared himself for a bone-popping hug when all this was over. Nice trick, a voice came over the comm. You'll have to teach me how to do that sometime. Elzar looked back to see Ty coming up fast on their tail, her own Sandval panting heavily. So, you're my apprentice now? He asked. Ty barked a sharp laugh. You wish. She brought her Sandval alongside him, and Elzar couldn't help but notice the blaster burns on the creature's side. What happened to you? He shouted across. Ty had peeled off not long after they had engaged the Nihil, Elzar losing her in the theater of war. You asked whether Sandvals fly in twos? Turns out it's threes. There's another. Ty's Sandval bucked beneath her. Apparently these two are the babies. Mom was still out there, trapped by a bunch of Nihil in the middle of the crazy exhibit with creepy singing holograms. Now it was Elzar's turn to laugh. United in Song was still playing, even through all of this. He hoped it had given the Nihil an earworm they would never forget. But you got her out. Ty patted her Sandval's neck. This little fella came to Mama's help, but he'll live safe and sound with a group of Padawans. You'll be pleased to know the place is now crawling with Jedi. Never thought I'd be so glad to see it. The Force provides, he began, before looking down to the ground. What is it? I asked, as Eldar clambered to his feet on his Sandval's back. And what in Sar's name are you doing? You've handled the mama. Reckon you can handle both kids at once? He asked, igniting his lightsaber. Do I have a choice? No, Elzar replied and leapt into the air. On the course, badly at trolls. I knew that they would find a way to bring they had to. We have incoming channel for Penata or the Elegencia. There was no avoiding the suffering of those whose lives had been torn apart, no avoiding their pain. Chapter 57. The Unity Arc. Somewhere in the back of his mind, Stellan knew the galaxy was watching. He could hear the whine of the Candroids, almost feel their lenses closing in, picking up every scrap of dirt on his robes, the injuries on his face, the tears in his eyes. Jedi weren't supposed to cry. They were supposed to keep their emotions in check. But weren't they also supposed to feel compassion for those in pain, for light and life? For light and... Stellan heard a whimper, but didn't realize it was his own. There was no avoiding the suffering of those whose lives had been torn apart, no avoiding their pain. If he could, if the anguish and the misery didn't cut him to the quick, then what kind of Jedi would he be? People were racing toward him, through the military drove from Chile running toward the Queen. Faced both public and led by a giant place around them, and Gregory, clutching him. Was Bell and his sharp arm chasing after a teenage boy who was racing full pelt towards Stellan, yelling one breaking word. So crouched down on his knees in front of Stellan. But as the doctors confirmed that she could be after his sister came Vallow. The Jedi Council was in session, as was right and proper considering what had happened, but it was also the last place Stellan wanted to be. Outside the nearly completed Jedi outpost, the relief work was well underway. Medical and support ships had arrived from the core, and the large majority of Jedi were on the streets of Lonisa securing buildings and tending to survivors. The outpost itself had become the center of the relief effort. The Republic administration building had been hit in the final attack, and while it was still standing, had been decreed structurally unsafe. What remained of Samara Un's staff had been transferred to the temple and were doing their best to help folk get home when most of transports in the spaceport had been destroyed. The job hadn't been expected of them. Samara and her team had simply taken the initiative, volunteering to oversee the cleanup. Is there word from Starlight? The question snapped Stellan Ba'o, the here and now. It had been spoken by Keaton Murag, a Noth, a relatively new member of the council who had been elevated just PR the great disaster. Yes, Grandmaster Vita responded. Although Marshal Chris is still engaged at Miluta, along with half the Jedi in the sector, it seems Terry Rosasan, always a combative member of the council, had already been critical of Avar's handling of the Drengir affair, especially her alliance with the Hutts. Now she was positively scathing as news reached them that Avar had summoned more Jedi than expected to support her assault on the Drengir's supposed root world. Marshal Chris seems to think she can do what she wishes, with or without the will of the council. Nonsense, Uriel Poof, the long-necked Cormian, interjected. Master Chris is operating well within the parameters we afforded her, and in direct response to Chancellor So's request to deal with the Drengir threat as quickly and effectively as possible, Master Adampo pointed out, the Arcora joining the conversation for the first time since the Hollow Conference began. Master Rosasan made a response, but her words were lost in static, the Council's images scrambling for a moment. Communications lines had largely been restored, but the wider network was struggling to cope with the sheer amount of data beaming back and forth from Vallow. At this rate, Stellan was surprised no one had suggested breaking out the antique courier droids the Republic had used in their first push for the frontier a century or so before. The Master's hollows swam back onto the walls. Uriel caught mid-sentence. Besides, Master Chris had no way of knowing what was happening on Vallow. None of us did until the reporter's message got through. Rosasan tutted. Can you imagine what would have happened if the Togrutas hadn't responded? But they did. Republic longbeams close behind. Stellan's tone was more forceful than he'd intended, but had the gratifying effect of shutting up Rosasan, at least for a moment. Master Vita regarded him with concern over the holochannel. Master Gios, are you sure you couldn't rest? Your injuries were not as bad as they look, thank you. Well, that wasn't a lie. It wasn't exactly the whole truth, either. Torben Buck had wanted to plunge him into a back-to-bath, but instead Stellan had pulled rank, opting for simple Regiv washes instead. A medical droid had closed the larger cuts with microsutures, Buck warning him that the stitches might leave scars. Stellan waved the concerns away, insisting that the already depleted Bacta supplies be redirected to those who really needed them. As a Jedi, Stellan could look after himself, relying on the Force rather than stims that could dull his senses. What of the Nihil? Grandmaster Veeder asked. This was better. Stellan wanted to deal with facts, not recriminations. Most escaped, he told the ancient Tarnab. The Valon security force does have a small number of Nihil prisoners, but most are in critical condition. However, Archivist Orbelin did manage to subdue one raider, a lamproid by the name of Quinn Amarant. We have him in custody here in the outpost. Peter's bushy eyebrows shot up. You do? At the request of Larip Reza, who has assumed the position of acting chancellor while Lena So recovers. The mention of her name took Stellan back to those dreadful moments after the bomb had detonated. He had been convinced that So was going to pass away in his arms. The explosion had reduced the Rue to scrap, throwing So and the others to the ground. Most had revived with some odd broken bones, Madame Cancera suffering a flated lung, but So had been caught in the wreckage, her injuries ever. True to form, though, the Chancellor had proved stronger than he looked. Torben Buck had worked wonders maintaining her condion before public medics could arrive. Now, she was in the outpost's infirmary, in a clinical coma, ready to be transported back to Coruscant as soon as the doctors confirmed that she could be moved. Yes, Stellan confirmed, although as yet he hasn't revealed anything of note. However, we do have this. Stellan pressed a button on his cuff, activating footage of the fight between Orbelin and the same Twi'lek who had attempted to storm the walker. He let it play for a moment before pausing it, the woman freezing mid-attack. This is a recording captured by Rildero's Camdroid T9. The Twi'lek appears to go by the name of D. As I said, Amarant hasn't revealed much, but the Jedi who last interviewed him reported a sense that D holds a position of power within the Nihil. Stellan felt his face burn at Rosassen's question. Indeed, I did, and she was largely responsible for your injuries. She is a skilled fighter, so it would seem they see. And what of the Drengir? Stellan frowned at the sudden switch in conversation. We have already discussed Marshal Chris's mission. I am not talking about Avar Chris's crusade, Master Geos. I am talking about the fact that Drengir matter was discovered on Valo during the attack. I hear it was slightly more than that, Keaton Murad commented. Stellan fought the urge to pinch the bridge of his nose to relieve the headache that was building by the moment. Yes, Master Murad. According to a report by Vernestra Rowe, your former apprentice, Rosa-san cut in. My former apprentice, yes, Stellan acknowledged. As you know, a number of Jedi were operating at the fair during the attack, although due to the blackout, we were unable to communicate. During this time, the Padawan known as Ram Jomaram discovered Nihil troops planting what appear to be Drengir spores around the commute, suggesting the Nihil have found a way to seed the Drengir, Rosa-san pointed out. Another weapon in their arsenal. Preacher Vider looked concerned. This has already been raised in the Senate, the Tarnab told them. Some even suggest that the Nihil are behind the Drengir crisis as a whole. What better way to spread fear along the frontier? Morag asked. Keeping Starlight Beacon conveniently busy while they raise merry hell on Valo, Rosasson added. I hardly think that's fair, Stellan injected. Rosasson actually went so far as to scoff. Really, Master Geos, and why wasn't the hero of Hetzal on Valo at the time of the attack? Why had she commandeered so many Jedi for her task force? Jedi who could have come to Valo's aid if they hadn't been occupied by an infestation of murderous plants. We have been plagued by these Nihil, led to believe that they are little more than a rabble. But if this is all true, if this attack was all part of an elaborate scheme, then they are an army, Stellan said gravely, with tactics and unexpected resources at their command. Finally, we agree on something, Master Geos, Rosasson conceded. The real question is, if they are an army, who is their general? Stellan looked over at the hologram of the Twi'lek who had bested him. Do we know what happened to her? Uriel Poof asked, as if reading his thoughts. She was gone when the smoke cleared, Stellan told the Cormian. Master Man believes she escaped in a nearby Nihil junker. Is there a possibility she was arrested by the Togruta military? Rosasson asked. Unfortunately, We have no idea, Vader said. Now that Regasa Elrek has been recovered, the Togrutas have broken contact with the public. Makes them to contact the Regasa's unable to talk to anyone after this incident, usually requesting, suggesting the Nihil have found a way to see the Dreadgear process. Heavy weapon against themselves, which repeated her concern. It has already been raised in the Senate, the Tarnab told them. Some even suggest that the Nihil are behind the Drengir crisis as a whole. What better way to spread fear along the frontier? Morag asked. Keeping Starlight Beacon conveniently busy while they raise merry hell on Valo, Rosason added. I hardly think that's fair, Stellan injected. Rosason actually went so far as to scoff. Really, Master Geos? And why wasn't the hero of Hetzal on Valo at the time of the attack? Why had she commandeered so many Jedi for her task force? Jedi who could have come to Valo's aid if they hadn't been occupied by an infestation of murderous plants. We have been played by these Nihil, led to believe that they are little more than a rabble. But if this is all true, if this attack was all part of an elaborate scheme, then they are an army, Stellan said gravely, with tactics and unexpected resources at their command. Finally, we agree on something, Master Geos, Rosasan conceded. The real question is, if they are an army, who is their general? Stellan looked over at the hologram of the Twi'lek who had bested him. Do we know what happened to her? Uriel Poof asked, as if reading his thoughts. ID. She was gone when the smoke cleared, Stellan told the Quirmian. Master Man believes she escaped in a nearby Nihil junker. Is there a possibility she was arrested by the Togruta military? Rosasan asked. Unfortunately, we have no idea, Vetter said. Now that Regasa Elrek has been recovered, the Togrutas have broken contact with the Republic. I attempted to contact the Regasa myself, but have been This Stellan could believe. The Togruta fleet had left as soon as Elrek Yovid had been evacuated, taking Ambassador Tis along with them. Images of the monarch steeped in the blood of those she had been trying to save had replayed repeatedly on the newsnets, as had the footage of Stellan cradling the injured chancellor. His anguish lay bare. Like it or not. And Stellan did not. The picture of him openly weeping over Lina So's body had become a defining image of the atrocity. Tia Toon had obviously gone into overdrive, praising Stellan and the Order to the Skies, while also using the image to tell the galaxy that the Jedi had been pushed to the limit. How many more lives would have been lost if it hadn't been for the timely arrival of the Togrutas, especially, the senator was keen to add, with the Longbeams arriving too late. Obviously, all this fed into his narrative about establishing a Central Republic Defense Force. But the worst thing of all was that he was right. The death toll on Valo was astronomical. But just how much had the Jedi held back the tide? How much difference had they actually made? Stellan's thoughts were broken by a courteous cough at the chamber door. Stellan didn't need to look to see who it was. He could feel his friend's presence. Troubled though it was, him and every other Jedi on the planet. Master Man, he said formally, gesturing Elzar into the room. Elzar stepped forward, bowing respectfully in front of the council members. Apologies for the interruption, Masters, but the Chancellor has requested Stellan's presence. Acting Chancellor Reza? Rosasan asked. Elzar shook his head. No, Lina So. I'm pleased to say she's awake. He turned to face Stellan. If he wants to see you, Chapter 60. The Infirmary, Valo Temple Outpost. Stellan wasn't surprised to find Rildero beside Lina So's bed, T9 hovering at a discreet distance. She insisted on giving an interview almost as soon as she was awake, Lara Breza told him, with the weary look of a man who had recently engaged in an argument he would never win. Thankfully, Fool wasn't here to burst a blood vessel. How is Norel? Stellan inquired. Doing well, Lina So said, her voice weaker than he had ever heard it, which was understandable, considering what she had been through. The private chamber was devoid of medical droids, but only because Torban Buck had personally volunteered to care for the Chancellor, until she could be transferred onto the Coruscant Dawn, which had survived the assault, its crew fighting off a Nihil boarding party firsthand. Stellan looked over at Buckets of Blood, who was checking the Chancellor's vitals. Buck was an acquired taste, but his medical abilities were second to none. So looked better than Stellan had expected. Another reason why Reza had no doubt allowed the interview, which would go through a rigorous vetting procedure before being broadcast. Sensors had been placed on So's neck and temples, but she was free of breathing tubes, the scratches and cuts on her pale face either already treated or covered with Bacta strips. Stellan fought the urge to look down at the bed, already having been briefed that Buck hadn't been able to save So's right leg. He wondered if that detail had made it into the interview. He approached the medbed, Elzar waiting by the door. Rill went to move aside, but Stellan made a point of smiling at her warmly. It was the first time he'd seen the young reporter since the opera house. "We owe you a debt of thanks, Miss Darrow." Rill blushed, shaking her head. "I don't think so." "I do," So said from her bed. "From what Archivist Orba Lynn informed me, it was you who got the message off planet." Rill's discomfort only increased. "I was just doing my duty, ma'am." Stellan was impressed by the woman's humility. He knew reporters didn't like to become the story, but this needed to be said. Be that as it may, without your actions, the Togrutas would never have known that we were in danger. "That their Ragasa was in danger, you mean," Reza muttered, only to be reprimanded by So. "They saved us, Lereb." "Yes, the long beams came, but the Togrutas turned the tide. Weak or not, the Chancellor was still a formidable presence." "I have placed Miss Darrow's bravery and resourcefulness on the record in our interview, an exclusive she more than deserves." "An interview I should edit," Rill said, waving for T9 to follow her. "My producer will be waiting." She turned to leave, but So raised an arm, light glinting from the tube delivering painkillers to the back of her hand. "No, please stay. Perhaps some shots of us talking would add a little color to your reef. The council member doesn't object." Ort. How could he? Not only was Lena so formidable, she was also A. "I have no objections," Stellan said, hoping the Force would forgive him a little white lie. Although maybe the footage should be picture, no sound. "Agreed," Reza said firmly. "Some of the conversation may be sensitive." Rill took a step back, although her cam droid remained where it was near the ceiling. "Understood. You got that, T9? The droid bleeped once and began recording again. Stellan drew closer, trying not to feel self-conscious under the droid's gaze. "I won't ask you how you are feeling." A smile tugged at the Chancellor's lips. "I think you just did. 1. Giving an interview already. Most people would have at least waited until they were out of bed." She cocked an amused eyebrow. "Are you saying I'm like most people?" He shook his head. "Never." Her face grew more somber. "The people deserve to see me. This is my fault. I don't think anyone—" That hand came up again, stopping him before he could protest. "Please, Stellan, we both know what the media is saying, and if they aren't saying it, they should. I was warned. We were all warned, and yet I carried on as if we were untouchable. How many people lied because of my arrogance, council member?" Stellan assumed the question was rhetorical, letting her continue. "How many people will ever return home from a fun day at the fair? I take personal responsibility for each and every death. Disposal, intelligence, security, whatever you need. Please, will you bring these villains to justice?" Stellan didn't know what to say. He had expected for the Jedi to be asked to investigate, but this was something else. He began, searching for the right words. "I will consult with the council. I mean it, Master Jedi. I still believe in my heart that we were right to vote against Toon's permanent defense force. The last thing the Republic needs is an army, but if you ask, I am convinced that every local security planet that flies the Republic flag will stand with you. Forces, planetary guards." Now it was Stellan's turn to stop her. The Jedi are not warriors, nor should we ever be. But you are symbols, she insisted, trying to sit up. Especially now, especially you, Madam Chancellor. So reached up, grabbing his hand in hers. Stellan, please. I've seen you on the holonet after the attack. Everyone has. Holding me when... Her voice caught for a second. When it looked as though it was too late. The entire galaxy has seen the compassion in your eyes, seen the resolve. That wasn't the face of a general or a politician. It was the face of a man who is better than those who would do us harm, a man who will protect us, a man who will be just. We need the Jedi now more than ever. We need the light. Stellan felt the eyes of everyone in the room upon him, of Reza, of Rill, of Buck and Elzar. Lena So didn't know what she was asking. There were so many who were better suited to the task. Avar, most of the council. Yoda, if anyone knew where he was. Stellan had been caught out like everyone else. Had he paid the price? He'd been wounded, yes, humiliated even at the hands of a lone Twi'lek. Stellan or prowess on the Corps. The sudden appearance of a war cloud. Could he be a symbol to them? Could he even try? Council member? So asked, looking for an answer he struggled to provide. Thankfully, he didn't have to, not yet. Reza's datapad bleeped, and the vice-chancellor looked up at his superior with alarm. Larep? It's Chile, Madam Chancellor. A secure channel. The Togruta military. The Caloran ran his fingers across the pad, checking the data stream. Not as far as I can tell. It seems to be coming from the royal court. So sat up in her bed, adjusting her medical gown. Miss Darrow, if you could stop recording, please. The reporter nodded. Of course. Would you like us to leave? I think you, of all people, deserve to see this. Thank you, Larep. Reza pressed a control and a large hologram appeared on the wall, Elorek Yovet's face close to the cam. Regasa, So acknowledged with a slight bow. It is good to see you awake, Chancellor, the Togruta replied. I must admit I feared the worst. Elorek, I am so sorry. The Supreme Huntress shook her head. It was not your fault, Lena. None of it. You were my guest, and I came freely despite the concerns of my Security Council. I, for one, am glad I was there. I don't think Captain Maramis would agree with Stellan said. You, Regessa. On the contrary, Lord Jedi. Captain Maramis has been singing your praises ever since leaving Valo. As have I, her eyes flicked back to. You stood by your people, pulling them out of the rubble, but not you. With your own hands, if need be, assuring them time and time again that all would be well. As did you, Regasa. Which is why we are kindred spirits, as are Captain Maramis and Master Geos. You protect those in need and weep for those you cannot save. You are the spirit of the Republic, a spirit you share with my people. You saying, Regata? So leaned forward in her bed. What are? I am saying that the Nihil's cowardly attack showed us that isolation is not the way. Only together can we be strong. You are talking about an alliance. At first, yes, maybe more in time. It will not be easy. There are plenty in my government who disagree with me, but they will listen. I am their queen, and I will be silent no longer. Of this, Stellan had no doubt. Maybe another of the Chancellor's great works was already in motion. Maybe there was still hope. In the meantime, the Regasa continued. As a sign of goodwill, I am sending you a data package containing information that my intelligence services intercepted, encoded messages from the Nihil Communications Network, from their comm network, Reza repeated in disbelief. There were those who did not wish you to have it, preferring to use it for our own advantage, but I see no advantage in keeping secrets from our allies, for that is what we are, Chancellor. On that you have my word. Reza's datapad bleeped. I have the package. On the holo, Elarakiova smiled. Excellent. We will talk again, Lena So, whether our governments like it or not. The Senate will welcome your friendship, the Chancellor responded. Talks can commence whenever you are ready. We are ready now. My ministers just don't know it yet. To the spirit of unity, so repeated, and the hologram cut off. The chancellor didn't waste any time, turning to Reza. Have that intel analyzed and report back immediately. The Caloran was already striding from the room. At once, Madame Chancellor, the door slid open as he left, and so saw her son waiting in the reception room beyond, Jean Larien at his side. There was no mistaking the tears that brimmed in her eyes. Now, if you could all excuse me, she said, beckoning Kip in. I would like a moment alone with my son. Stellan indicated for everyone to leave them in peace, all except for Matari and Voru, who jumped to their feet, purring loudly. Stellan stood aside to let the young man in. Kip So ran to his mother and threw his arms around her, Lena So hugging him back. Stellan watched them as the doors slid back, looking away sharply as he realized that Elzar was studying him. Well, that was intense, his friend finally said. That's one word for it. You didn't give her an answer. No, I didn't. Elzar crossed his arms. So, what's it to be? I mean, if the supreme huntress of the Togrutas can stand up against her own government for the safety of the galaxy. Stellan raised a single eyebrow. Have you finished? Probably, possibly, maybe not. Stellan turned and marched from the medical wing. Well, maybe you could, because we have work to do. Chapter 60-1, Lonisa City Spaceport. The Nihil had done a number on every cruiser and transport, raiding the majority and scuppering the rest. The Dynamo was no different. No, Claren moaned as they stood in the once pristine ship. I had found Mantessa's daughter picking through its wreck. Hold, the terminal smashed, cables strewn everywhere. In all honesty, Ty was surprised that the reactor hadn't blown. There was no way the ship would ever fly again. I guess we should get ourselves on a list. Claren looked at her in puzzlement. List? For those needing transport. The Republic is putting on a number of long beams, although I can't see us jumping to the front of the queue anytime soon. Can't your friends help? My friends? The Jedi? Ty couldn't help but laugh. What she'd shared with Elzar Mann had been intriguing, but she had no intention of pursuing that particular connection. She still wasn't convinced that Elzar was completely stable, and besides, their brief union had stirred up memories she'd tried hard to forget. Plius, the Yallow Shrine. No, she had gotten close enough. Worst of all, it seemed that the Jedi, conflicted as he was, had rubbed off on her. The old Ty would have let Claren find her own way off planet, but the new, improved Ty found it impossible to simply abandon the girl. Claren had just lost her mother, albeit a mother who had parted around unrefined Ricanium. Ty thought back to the girl who had stumbled into a war cloud looking for them after their arrests. There was no way Claren could manage by herself. At the very least, Ty would get her to a way station before returning to KL-03 and Rover. However, if they were going to arrange transport, they needed to get a move on before all the spaces were filled, which meant Claren had to stop flitting from computer to computer and go register. None of them are going to work, Ty told her as Claren tried the 5th console in a row. What are you looking for? Ty asked, peering over the girl's shoul. Claren ignored her, working through an obviously fragmented file system. No, she muttered, quietly at first, and then with more urgency as she flicked from section to section. No. The last exclamation was punctuated with a fist to the keyboard, the computer beeping in indignation. They're gone, Claren said, slumping in her seat. What are? Ty's patience was wearing thin. Talk to me, Claren. Mother's plans for the nullifier, and that's a bad thing. Why? Claren looked at her as if she was talking to a child. Because the Nihil raided this ship. Ty's heart dropped to her boots as realization dawned. If the Nihil had access to a device that could knock out energy weapons, she sighed, surrendering to the inevitable. What was that you were saying about my Jedi friends? Valo Jedi Archive. Valo Outpost's Jedi archive was not how its architect had intended it to look. The large chamber, with its sweeping staircases and elegant data stacks, had been transformed into an emergency operations center. Everywhere you looked, Republic and Jedi staff worked alongside each other, sitting at hastily installed comm terminals as they coordinated the evacuation of those who were stranded on the planet. Elzar strode through the mass of technicians and officials, nodding a greeting at Orbelin, who was leading the Jedi's part in the proceedings. The archivist, his containment suit now fully repaired, was too easy to engage in idle chit-chat, a fact that pleased Elzar, not out of enmity, more because there was another conversation he needed to have. Hello, Samra. The Valon looked up from her screens, the light of the displays wrecked in her emerald eyes. Hello yourself. Elzar was pleased that, save for a few cuts and grazes, Samara looked. Although the dark shadows under her eyes betrayed an exhaustion she guessed would only deepen in the days ahead. Tion, as he stood waiting, he fielded 3 calls and authorized a request for supplies to the Field Med Center that had been set up in the park's Technology and Science Zone. He walked around the terminals to stand beside her. I've never heard of that. Where is it? Samara sighed, putting down the pad she was attempting to study, and looked up at him, a pained expression on her face. Really? You want to do this now? Elzar did not want to do this now. He would rather face an entire pack of Fragsides. We haven't seen each other since the night of the opening. Yes, I know. Things have been a little busy. Samara ran her hands through her hair. Okay, look, I know what you want to say and there's no need. It was fun. We had a good time and then the world ended. Even if it hadn't ended, then that would have been the end of it. Thinking of the project mission with this faster. Chapter 62. Follow Rabbi Anhu. The public outposts, Jedi archive, always a architect, ended it. The large chamber with sweeping staircases, elegant data stack. I said to them, no one knew about the escape pod. Particularly difficult to swallow. We had plans for the venomous slug, but had thought him dead. And now here he was, returning to base. He would make storm for this. Unless... She grabbed a disruptor rifle, barking into the comm as she made for the door. Let him land, but Sean the ship for what? Wasn't that obvious? Was everyone trying to annoy her today? For tracking devices, you idiot. Get it done now. Up! Amaranth grabbed the Karana girl, his serrated pincer threatening to break the delicate skin of her arm. Don't hurt me. Please. Pathetic. The transport's ramp splashed into a puddle of water as it lowered. Amaranth sniffed as he dragged the female from the ship. It was raining again. He didn't mind. He liked it. It reminded him of Florn. Amaranth could never return home, not after he had murdered his entire nest, but Grizzal was the next best thing. Before the attack on Valo, he'd taken to hunting the Rex boars in the forest. Maybe he would hunt later today, after he had delivered his prize. At least the female hadn't been a nuisance as Head made the long journey to the base. Without a path, Amaranth had been forced to make a series of short jumps, which had taken an age, but which the Republic shuttle had handled admirably. It was a good little ship. Perhaps he'd ask Lorna if he could retrofit it with a path engine and some proper guns. And there she was, in the middle of the exercise yard, not caring a jot about the rain that hammered against her mask. Ed tried to hate her for leaving him behind, but he knew he would have done the same in her position. Fed said it often enough. Survival was all that mattered. I brought you a present, Dee, he said, shoving the Kurana forward. The female slipped on the wet rockcrete, landing at Dee's feet. "Who presents the Tempest Runner?" said, indicating the Republic ship with her disruptor. "Where'd you steal that?" Amaranth popped out his thorax proudly. "From the Jedi outpost." Dee's tone barely changed, but Amaranth knew she was impressed. "And who is this?" The female spoke before he could reply. "My name is Clarence Chekat." Quickly, not wanting. She spoke of a great weapon. Amaranth added the girl to steal his thunder. "Did she now?" Amaranth imagined her eyes flicking up to him. "And you weren't followed?" Amaranth shook his segmented head. "No. I told them I would hurt the female. And you checked for homing, Eakins." His long tongue went dry. Lorna Dee brought up her rifle and fired. Amaranth howled as he lost an arm, the flesh dissolving in the disruptor's beam. He shifted, firing again. Another arm vanished. The barrel didn't drop. "Have you finished wailing?" Amaranth nodded, the charred stumps burning in the rain. "You're lucky it's not on full power." He didn't shout. He didn't have to. "You could have brought the entire Jedi Order to our door." Amaranth forced himself to speak. "I am sorry, Runner." "Sorry?" Another squeeze of the trigger, another limb gone. "Lucky for you, we scanned that junk heap before you landed. Did you find anything?" "And 11 lone on thine. If we did, you were lucky." Now hiss off. Now they scuttled over and grabbed Claren, dragging her after Lorna. The girl didn't struggle. Amaranth watched them go and started to plot his revenge. The ramp was the Republic transport was silent, save for the constant drum of rain. Still open, but no one came to investigate. It wouldn't be long. Soon the Nihil would be swarming over the craft to see what they could salvage or adapt to their own nefarious uses. A panel slid aside in the hold's low ceiling, and Indira Stokes jumped down, followed by her Padawan and his charhound. Bell rolled his shoulders, trying to loosen the stiffness caused by hiding in a maintenance shaft for so long. Indira had only opened the panel once to check on Claren. The unconscious Kuranu had stirred the noise of Indira jumping down and panicked, but Stokes had calmed the young woman, promising they would keep her safe. Claren's kidnapping had not been part of the plan, and Bell had wanted to spring from their hiding place the moment the lamproid dragged her from the ship, but Indira had placed a hand on his chest, indicating for him to wait. He knew she was right. They would have lost the element of surprise, no matter how much it bothered him to place Claren in even more danger than she already was. He gripped the leather-bound lightsaber Stellan Gios had given him to replace his own, which still languished at the bottom of Lake Lonisa. It had belonged to Stellan's master, the great Ranakant, and was an honor to carry. Force willing, he would prove himself worthy of her legacy. "What now?" he whispered as Indira peered through the hatch. "We gather intel and see that Claren is safe." "Of course." "Do you know how to shield yourself in the Force?" Bell thought back to the roof den on Yalo I've seen Elzar Mann do. "Directions so you can pass unnoticed." "I can help at first, but you'll need to take over as we move deeper into the camp." Bell steadied himself. "I am ready for this and so much more." Indira reached into her robes, pulling out a small metal device. "I have to say, the Nihil are smarter than I expected, scanning for a homing beacon before Lamproid came in to land." "That's impressive." He looked for a good spot and clamped the device behind a bulkhead. "I mean, it's not like anyone would signal once a ship is safely on the ground." She flicked a switch, and the tiny unit began to flash. Indira and Bell exchanged a smile and sneaked from the ship. Many systems away, Elzar's console beeped. He smiled, feeding the coordinates into his vector's hyperframe. The frame's Navidroid bleeped a response, confirming the route was laid in. Elzar raised an eyebrow as he read the data scrolling across the vec. "This is going to be bumpy." Forward scope. "The way you fly?" Ty muttered from the jump seat. "Why am I not surprised?" He chuckled, firing the thrusters. "The Force will be with us." "Good," he replied. "It'll need to be." Elzar swung the vector around and shot into hyperspace. Chapter 62-8, The Elegencia. The Elegencia's navigational console exploded into a blaze of light and fire. Chell was dead before he hit the deck, his blackened corpse rolling to lie beside Pan's lounger. He looked down into Chell's dead eyes and cursed Lorna Dee's name. His ship, his beautiful ship, was outnumbered. The few storms that had made it to the rendezvous were already gone. The Jedi didn't shoot to kill unless they had to, but the rest of the fleet had no such compunction. Lorna had served him up to them on a plate the little Twi'lek shutta. The ship lurched, nearly throwing him from his seat. The guns were still firing, those loyal to him still at their posts. Pan hauled himself up, his head spinning. He was sick, he knew that, and he knew it was killing him, but he wasn't going to die here. He tried to make it to the back of the flight deck, his vision blurring. A young Bith ran up to him, one side of his face burned beyond recognition, as he babbled in his native tongue. Tempest Runner. What? Ban punched the Bith aside, hearing his bulbous skull crack. That's what you got for standing in his way. That's what Lorna Dee would find out for herself. Had Ro been in on it? If that was the case, she was a bigger fool than he thought. The bastard was dismantling the Tempest one by one, remaking the Nihil in his own image. He would be next unless he got to her first. He was out in a corridor now, racing as fast as his bulk would take him. An Emerian cloud was blocking his way. Pan pulled the blaster from his leg holster, and the cloud hit the deck, minus a head. No one knew about the escape pod. Not Pan's crew, not Lorna, and definitely not Ro. It was fitted with a path that Ro's father had given him years ago, programmed to return to the one place that no Daoin ever wanted to go. Sure, launching it would rip the belly out of the Elegencia, but the ship was already dead. He was breathing hard when he reached the secret door, harder still when he had to rip it open, the mechanism having jammed. Once, twice, he almost gave up as he hauled himself through a crawl space that was only just big enough. Gods, he'd never sweated this much. His heart was beating far too fast, and his skin felt like it was too big. Was it too big? Was that even possible? Finally, he found the hatch and swung into the pod. Collapsed into it was probably a better description, but he was in it all the same. The rest of the Elegencia had been defined by its luxury. Style over substance? Maybe, but the pod was all about function. He couldn't relax as he strapped himself into the seat. Struggling to focus, he sealed the hatch and fired up the power cells. Coordinates flashed up on the nav screen. Pan gargled a phlegm-choked laugh. It had been centuries since he'd left Dawit to forge a new life for himself. Who would have thought that he'd be returning after all this time to do so again? He wondered if any of his family were still alive. At least killing them would cheer him up. Pan closed his eyes for a moment, listening to the death throes of his ship, dreaming of the victory that should have been his. He had written his name across the galaxy, and now Ro would take the credit, Lorna at his side. So be it. Pan was dying. He'd accepted that now. But he'd keep going until he had mounted both of their duplicitous heads on a spike. Pan Ada slammed his hand down on the path control, and the rear of the Elegencia blew out as the escape pod punched its way into the maelstrom. High above Cycler, the battle raged on, Pan's Tempest fighting to the bitter end. No one even knew he was gone. Chapter 60-9, The Gaze Electric. Ro, please. This is intolerable. Ro silenced Utterson with a raised finger. Eagerness was one thing, but petulance was very much another. Granted, the Shadr fan had no idea what Ro was watching on his helmet's internal display, but that hardly mattered. They were ready when he said it, not before. Ro watched as a Coranu woman was dragged into Dee's chamber. The images broadcast from Lorna's own mask, positioned strategically nearby. Zetar was with her, beady eyes peering at the newcomer. At least the Talpini wouldn't go the same way as Pan. Zetar knew his place. Ro had wondered how Lorna would react to Pan's death, how she would have reacted to the existence of the hidden injector at his wrist. a device of his own devising, constructed after Pan's failed coup before Valo, filled with a fatal cocktail of Utterson's deadliest toxins, more potent than anything they had pumped into the Jedi. It had performed admirably, although the element of surprise was now gone, a spur-of-the-moment decision on his part. Ro hadn't expected Pan even to return from Valo. The charge he had planted in the Illigencia's primary bomber bay was supposed to have rid him of the Dalwooten, rigged to detonate when the battlecruiser attempted to jump back to Gryzel. The explosion would be blamed on damage caused in the raid and the danger of path travel. Like Kassav before him, Pan would have become a martyr whose name Ro could invoke to stir loyalty in the Dalwooten's retinue. But the device had been destroyed by the Jedi in the battle over Valo, yet another reason to curse their name. When Ro had seen Pan swaggering across the exercise yard, still, the traitorous oaf was dead now, and the remaining 2 Tempest runners had fallen in line. No one would challenge Ro ever again. Amaret mentioned a weapon. Ro turned his attention back to the interrogation, Lorna D's voice tinny over the comlink. The Kurano's reply, on the other hand, was surprisingly strong. Yes. A disruptor field capable of disarming energy weapons. What kind of energy weapons? The Kurano was standing tall, despite being flanked by 2 of Lorna's most imposing guards. Every kind you can imagine, and more besides. Blasters, disruptors, even lightsabers. Now, that was interesting. On the screen, Zedar scurried closer, leaving the power suit he had been tinkering with when the prisoner had been brought in. And where is this disruptor field? With the Republic? Then what good is it to us? Lorna had asked the very question Ro was thinking. Because that is just a prototype, powered by raw Racanium. And I hope it poisons them. Zetar turned back to his suit. Kill her, Lorna. She's wasting our time. B. Ro was inclined to agree. A pity. He killed the vid feed and looked around for Utterson, but the Chadra fan was nowhere to be seen. Ro's stomach churned. Surely the idiot hadn't. He turned to the viewing window as Utterson's body smashed. It's almost time. Loden had waited long enough, listening to the voice in his head, enduring the affront of the Nihil's experiments. His mind wasn't clear, not by a long shot, but it was more focused than it had been in months. He had known the moment had come before the voice in his head prompted him, when the Chadra fan had shuffled into the lab in his grubby white coat, muttering beneath his breath. The lights had gone off, the sounds silenced, and the scientist had limped into the circle of equipment, a hypodermic in his filthy hands. Release me. Roden wasn't even sure if he had said the words out loud. The Chadra fan certainly ignored him, priming the hypo. You will release me. He had tried this so many times since his incarceration, trying desperately to influence the minds of Ro and his pet scientist. But it had worked. Not once. Never. This time felt different. It is different. They are near. He is near. He? Who did the voice mean? Surely not Ro, surely. And then Loden felt it, a presence he hadn't felt since. All at once he was back in the Nova, talking to Bell over the comm. I look forward to celebrating your elevation, Jedi Knight Zettifar. Master, thank you. I'm not your master anymore, Bell. You're a Jedi Knight. Bell. Could it really be him, here of all places? No, surely not. It was too much to hope for. Hope is all we have, Loden. You can do this. You have to. Loden watched a drop of sedative squirt from the hypo as the scientist tested the needle. You will release me. The Chadra fan paused, a look of confusion crossing his bat-like features as the syringe slipped from his fingers to clatter to the floor. Utterson, that was his name. Loden could remember. He could remember everything they had done to him, all the tests, all the torture. It had to be Bell. Loden was drawing strength from his former Padawan, from their connection. Could Bell feel it too? The Chadra fan reached over to a nearby console, flicking a switch with a hesitant hand. The binders around Loden's limbs snapped open, and he pitched forward, throwing out weak arms to break his fall. Utterson gasped. The spell broken. Loden scrabbled forward, reaching for the hypo. The Chadra fan kicked at it, sending the injector scooting out of Loden's reach. Turning to shout for his master, Bal. Ro, the subject. Loden pushed out with the force and Utterson flew through the observation window, crashing into Ro. Now, move! Loden leapt through the broken window, the force flowing strength into limbs that had been dormant for too long. He stumbled on the other side, falling forward, his legs unable to support his weight. He fell to his side, trying to push himself up, only to find himself face to face with a yellow blade. Better. There is no escape, Marciano rasped from the other side of the misappropriated weapon, Loden's vision squirming. He lies. But Loden knew the truth. He couldn't escape, needed help. He needed, not on his own. He Bell, Chapter 70, the Greasel Camp. Master, Bell whispered. Indira looked at her Padawan, warning him to remain quiet. Sneaking into the complex had been trickier than she thought. They found Claren being questioned by the woman that Amarant had identified as Dee, but Bell was strangely distracted, struggling to cloud his presence, no matter how many times she tried to show him. Indira reached out, grabbing his arm. Where are you going? It's Loden. What? Bell pulled himself free, Ember going with him. He's alive, Indira. I felt him say my name. Here, now. I have to go. She let them leave. What else could she do? The moment Bell had said Loden's name, she'd known it to be true. He was right. There was no mistaking the presence she suddenly felt, as clear as if the Twi'lek were standing in front of her. It was fractured, yes, but they're all the same, amplified by his connection with Bell. Surely that wasn't possible. Surely the Nihil hadn't kept Loden Greatstorm prisoner for the better part of a year? Wait. The word snapped Indira back to the scene that was unfurling in Lorendi's chamber. Claren had taken a step forward toward the Nihil, her voice filled with a confidence that just hadn't been there before. I said it was a prototype, she told Dee. My prototype. My mother took credit for the device, but it was my work, as is this. She lifted up an arm, her bangle slipping down slightly from her wrist. Mother is gone, but this still exists. A portable unit powered by Tolium. I tried to approach one of your associates on Valo, but he tried to take it from me. He's dead now, too. Was that a threat? This girl was full of surprises. Show me, Dee commanded, holding out a hand. Claren covered the bangle protectively. Not until we discuss the price. You want to sell it to us? It was a shock to Indira as well. Why not? The Republic has no stomach for the device, and they think you already have the plans for the prototype. Why? Because I told them. I don't trust you, he said. A wise decision, Indira thought bitterly. How do I know you're speaking the truth? He asked. You want a guarantee? A sign of good faith? Find them, Dee yelled, bringing up her gun as the Talpini clambered into his power suit. Find them now! Indira sighed and drew her lightsaber. Elzar needed to arrive now. The Vector slammed into orbit over Grisol, Elzar immediately jettisoning the hyperframe so they could drop unhampered into the planetoid's atmosphere. Do you think they know we're here? Ty asked. Laser bolts streaked up at them from the jungle. I'll take that as a yes. He used the force to flick open a comm channel, keeping his hands on the yoke. Command, this is Laserbird 1. We have engaged the Nihil. Location confirmed. Transmitting now. Elzar's voice crackled over the comm, coordinates scrolling down Stellan's screen. Received and understood. Laserbird. Stellan breathed a sigh of relief. Having Elzar and Ty confirm the location of the Nihil base was his idea. It wasn't that he didn't trust Indira, but rather that he wanted to be absolutely sure before committing the rest of the drift. Beacons could be scrambled or deceived. Elzar Man couldn't. Onavas, Adin. He changed frequency, turning his attention back to the battle. Porter, we have contact. Can you handle things here? I'm insulted you even have to ask. Go. Are we going far? Nib asked, farther than expected. "Are you ready?" Uriaga growled a reply, and Stellan's contingent peeled away from the battle. He just hoped they'd arrive in time. "Row, we're under attack." Loden heard the report as clearly as if it had been beamed to his own comlink. He jumped forward, bolstered by his connection to Bell. Row lunged with the lightsaber, but it was a clumsy move, the hack of a barbarian as opposed to the graceful line of a Jedi who had trained his entire life. Loden feinted back, the tip of the stolen lightsaber burning into the deck. Row snarled in frustration, but he had already lost the battle. He just didn't know it yet. Loden threw out an emaciated arm and grabbed at Row's chest plate, not with shaking fingers, but with something infinitely powerful. Without pausing, he pulled back, the wasted muscles in his chest crying out in agony. But that was nothing compared with the pain Row felt as he was plucked from his feet. The Nihil leader whizzed past Loden as if caught on a line, the lightsaber tumbling from his grip. The weapon never even hit the floor. Loden caught it as it tumbled, feeling the coolness of the hilt, feeling like he had come home. Row, on the other hand, flew through the smashed window to slam into the very equipment that had kept the Jedi bound for so long. Loden turned, fighting to stay on his feet, but still with enough energy to push down with the Force. The lights Row and Utterson had used to dazzle him toppled down on the Nihil leader, followed by the table where Loden had hung night and day. Anyone else would have felt satisfaction at the grunt that issued from the masked man, but Loden Greatstorm wasn't anyone. He was a Jedi Master, and he needed Ofind, his former Padawan. Loden was vaguely aware of Row pushing himself up from beneath the equipment as he lurched out into the corridor, pounding the pommel of his lightsaber into the controls. The door slammed down, and Odin spun the weapon in his hand, igniting it to burn through the king mechanism. Lektu should have slapped against his shoulders. He had lost so much, but he needed to move. He didn't require a voice in his head to tell him that. Loden ran, his disrupted balance almost getting the better of him more than once, following the disembodied voice. He found a door, opened it, and stopped in his tracks, wondering if he was still seeing things. A woman was suspended in a web of tubes and cables, her body withered, the exposed skin parched and colorless, almost like the mummies Loden's ancestors used to bury beneath the grass fields on Ryloth. "It was you," he whispered, reverentially. "You've been talking to me." "Have I?" He blinked. Had the clone's lips moved? Could those milky eyes see him? "You must go." He went to step in through the door, only to be stopped by another wave of vertigo. He sagged against the door frame, willing the universe to stop spinning. "I am already gone. Here, but there. Far, but near." What does that mean? He needs you. You need him. I can see it, Loden. Why can't you? I am Jedi. It was a statement of facts, a bulwark to banish the nausea and set him on the right track. The woman was right. She had been right all along. He needed Bell. My time will come soon enough. Go, Jedi. Be one. There was a crash from down the corridor. Row was breaking out. Thank you, he breathed. No, the thanks should be yours, Loden Greatstorm. You brought me back. You Thoad. Chapter 71. The Gryzel Camp. Bell ran. Khan's lightsaber thrummed in his hand, batting back shots from the Nihil as he raced toward the large ship that hung in the skies beyond the Nihil camp. They had spotted him the moment he burst from Dee's building, which was hardly surprising. He was far too distracted to perform a mind trick. It wasn't the rain hissing down, or the battle that was unfurling in the air between Elzar's lone vector and the Nihil gun towers. No, it was the presence that was threatening to overwhelm him, a presence he'd wondered if wasn't there. He'd been here on that beast of a ship all this time. The craft was vast, easily larger than the Innovator, but it didn't matter. He'd search every single deck to find his master if need be. The Nihil's laser fire intensified, but Bell barely even noticed. All he cared about was getting up to that ship. Indira's comlink crackled, alerting Dee to her position. Great. The Nihil opened fire, switching her disruptor to automatic mode, the weapon chewing up the walls of the old prison, including the pillar Indira had been using as a hiding place. Indira, where are you? It was Elzar. Under fire, she replied, activating her lightsaber as the guards that had flanked Claren joined the onslaught with overcranked blasters that looked as though they should explode rather than fire. They were actor-shot. Bath, dew alley steaming with every shot. Indira swept a hand as if scrolling through data on a screen, plucking the smaller of the two guards from his feet so he slammed into his compatriot. They dropped to the floor in a tangle, but it would only be a short respite before they were back up and trying to murder her, if they're first. Dee's disruptor didn't get. Where's Bell? A good question. And Claren? That was the Thalothian, Ty Yorick. Indira leapt, somersaulting over Dee. The woman tracked the movement, the disruptor fire arcing across the ceiling. Indira dropped down in front of the Talpini, slicing through the power suit's arm before spinning to shield them all from Dee's blasts. Well, maybe not all of them. A stray bolt made it past Indira's lightsaber, striking the Talpini. He cried out, staggering back in his power suit as the ceiling blew in above their heads. Your friend's in there! Elzar Mann ignored Ty's outraged cry as he fired on the building, his bolts ripping through the roof below them. What? Like dropping a building on her. The canopy popped over them. Elzar swiveled in his seat. What are you doing? Checking if they're all right. Before he could stop her, Ty vaulted out of the aircraft, igniting her lightsaber before she reached the ground. Elzar pulled the canopy back into place, noticing another saber flashing ahead. It was Bel-Zettifar, running full pelt toward the colossal ship, deflecting shots from Nihil and the ground. Where was he going? Ahead, a hatch opened in the side of the gigantic vessel. A figure peered in the doorway, Elzar's mouth dropping open as he realized who it was. While above them, a vector was screaming toward Ro's ship, almost level with where he was standing. Something moved behind him. Loden whirled around to see Ro. The Nihil leader was staring at him from behind that infernal mask. Loden raised his lightsaber, trying to ignore how the blade trembled along with his hand. In response, Ro raised his palms. A sign of surrender. I am unarmed. I know you, Jedi. You won't harm an unarmed man. There was a trick coming. Loden wasn't stupid. His head may have been thumping, and he could barely stand on his feet, but he wasn't stupid. Behind him, the vector flew ever closer. Do you yield? Loden tried to draw more strength from Bell, from the pilot of the vector, from every Jedi in the field. It was all he could do to stay upright, his heels against the edge of the hatch, the storm raging at his back. Will I get a fair trial? Of course. The Nihil leader seemed to consider this for a moment before bringing his hands together, as if expecting Loden to clap him in binders. Loden glanced down at the proffered wrists, momentarily confused. What did Ro think he was? Of course, that was his mistake. This was the trick. Needle-sharp hypodermics sprang from devices on both of Ro's wrists, the ends glistening with poison. Ro lunged forward, slashing not at Loden's blade, but at the hilt in his hand. At any other time, Loden would have been able to react, to bring his lightsaber around, to sever whatever was jutting out from Ro's wrists, but the ravages of recent months and the energy expended in his escape finally proved too much. Loden could only jump back, avoiding the needle points. During his confinement, he'd often thought that Ro was poison. Now he would have taken was a nick. Just one nick, but new. The Force had shown him the danger, had saved him. It was just a pity it hadn't warned him as he jumped back into thin air. Loden's eyes went wide as he toppled back, his arms windmilling, the lightsaber he'd only just recovered slipping from his fingers. And then he was falling with the rain. Above, he caught a glimpse of Ro peering over the edge, watching him tumble away. He imagined the hypodermic snapping back into place, and then the Nihil was suddenly gone, vanished in a blaze of scarlet light as the approaching Vector unloaded its laser cannons into the open hatch. Loden called on the Force to slow his descent, but this time the Force didn't answer. He had exhausted what little strength he had. He was finished. Chapter 72. The ruin of the main building, Greasel. You saved me. After everything I did. Don't make me regret it, Indira thought, but contented herself with asking Claren if she could find a way out. Can you find a way out? Elzar had brought the roof down, but wasn't as good a shot as he thought he was. She would have been crushed by debris, Claren with her, if it weren't for the Force. Now beams and rocket bore down on them as Claren searched for a gap big enough to wriggle through. Indira had her back to the Coranu, a risk she would never have taken if the duplicitous inventor had a weapon in her hands. There were plenty of rocks on the ground, most large enough to brain a Jedi who was struggling to concentrate. But Indira liked to believe that Claren's sense of self-preservation would stop her from trying to kill the person who was stopping her from being crushed. Well, give me a moment, Claren said, grunting as she worked. Indira glanced over her shoulder to see the Coranu attempting to pry apart 2 lumps of reinforced rockcrete. You'll never shift them. Can't you just wiggle your fingers or something? By burying us alive? Stand back. What, step back from the rubble? An amethyst blade burst through the block, slicing down and almost catching Claren, who threw herself aside, barging into Indira. Dirt streamed down from above their heads. Careful! Claren screamed. The block suddenly jerked away, a head appearing in the gap, silver tendrils framed by a silver crown. Can you hold it? Ty Yorick asked. Her fellow Thalothian was still pretty much an unknown quantity to Indira, but at this juncture she was happy to accept any help she could get. Not for long. Could you? The rest of the request was lost as the rubble shifted, Indira grunting with the effort of holding it all in place. Yorick's hand shot up, her own face creasing. I'll try, but it's never been one of talents. My. Then what good are you? Claren said, trying to shove Yorick out of the way. The mercenary showed her by headbutting the girl between her eyes. That wasn't very Jedi, Indira said as the woman dragged the. If you can help, take the straw. UN3, you've got it. 1, 2, 3. Indira jumped forward. The Vector pulled up, streaming over the huge ship, but Bell could only watch Loden plummet toward him. This was no training exercise, and Loden wasn't controlling his descent. The older Jedi was in free fall, but Bell wasn't about to let him die. Not now, not after Bell had found him again. Ainsbull Gribe. Bell raised his free hand, reaching out with the Force. Loden slowed. Behind him, feet were running and a blaster fired. Bell twisted at the waist, his lightsaber coming about. The bolt met plasma and shot harmlessly away, Bell's eyes never leaving his master. The Nihil kept firing and Bell kept blocking, drawing Loden toward himself all the while. There was no way Bell could keep up this defense, not without letting Loden fall, even with Ember protecting their position with streams of scarlet flame. Soon a bolt would find its target. Soon the Nihil would get lucky, maybe not. Above them, the Vector came about and raked its weapons along the ground. The Nihil fell silent. No more footfalls, no more blaster bolts, his weapons skidding on the wet rockcrete. Bell sheathed his saber and broke into a run, both hands raised toward Loden. He could do this. He would do it. Bell, a voice echoed in his mind. Master, he replied. Bell jumped, catching Loden in midair. He twisted as they slammed into the ground, absorbing the impact. Not that Loden seemed to weigh anything anymore. He'd been so big, so imposing, and yet, now was little more than skin and bones and... Bell drew a sharp breath as he saw what had happened to Loden's Leku. They were gone, leaving nothing but cauterized stumps. Look what they've done to you, Bell said, overcome with emotion. What they've taken, they took nothing, Loden told him. Nothing that matters. The important thing is what they couldn't touch, what they could never erase. You and me, Bell, the way it's supposed to be. Loden held out a skeletal hand. Nearby, something jerked on the ground. Bell looked up to see Loden's lightsaber skidding toward them from where it had fallen, its hilt finding Loden's waiting palm. The Twilight pushed himself up and ignited the weapon, smiling wickedly in the light of the blade. Now point me in the direction of trouble. Chapter 73. The Coruscant Dawn, Hyperspace. Way back to the core. Kip's mother sitting up in the medbed she'd had installed in her office. Kip had only left her side once since arriving at the Temple outpost, to say goodbye to Jom at the spaceport. Jom had slipped Kip the digits of a private frequency, and Kip had pulled him close, giving the handsome young Valon a long, lingering kiss. The cam droids had recorded the entire embrace, but Kip didn't care. He'd never care about the cams again. Stellan Gios's face was projected against the wall, as were the rest of his drift. Nibasek, the Wookiee Bariaga, and two others Kip didn't know, a green-skinned girl and a human boy. Rildero's cam droid was recording everything, his mom having given the reporter exclusive access for as long as she wanted, subject to senatorial clearance, of course, and Kip wondered how far these images would be seen. He thought of the people who had survived the Innovator, NWO, Lisa, and the rest. Then there was Madame Consera, and the woman who had lost everything but her son. Lerip Reza had made sure they were looked after, securing them passage to wherever they poor Krantian wanted. Kip wondered if they were glued to the holonews, or whether they wanted to hide away from the news as long as possible. He couldn't blame them if it was the latter, not after everything they'd been through. But like it or not, history was being made here. The Nihil had struck a terrible blow, but the Jedi were striking right back. "You're coming up to the Nihil base?" his mother asked. "Preparing to drop out of hyperspace, ma'am," Stellan reported. "Discover everything you can about them, council member. I'm not going to make the mistake of underestimating them a second time." Stellan's jaw was set beneath his beard, the bruises along his cheek vivid in the flickering hololight. "None of us are. May the Force be with you all, Master Gios, for light and life." The assembled Jedi repeated the mantra as one, for light and life, and the hollows flickered out. Lena So leaned back into her pillows and squeezed Kip's hand. "You okay, Mom?" She smiled weakly at him, suddenly looking older than she ever had before. Kip glanced up. Rill had angled T-9 away from the bed. "I will be, kiddo. I will be. Just stay with me for a while longer, yeah?" "I'm not going anywhere," Kip told the most powerful woman in the galaxy, meaning every word. Chapter 74. Above Grisal. Nihil ships were scrambling into space as Stellan's drift burst out of hyperspace past. "It's about time." Elzar calmed up from the planet below. "I thought you could handle it. I can. I just didn't want you to miss all the fun." Stellan knew it was the adrenaline talking. At least he hoped it was. Letting Elzar pretend to tap into the dark side with the lamproid had been dangerous enough, but Stellan wondered if sending him into a potential battle had been the best decision. Still, it was done now. He had already planned a trip to Jeddah for the both of them as soon as the time was right, perhaps even gaining special dispensation to visit the Kyber mirrors beneath the Dome of Deliverance. Usually the priests of Firma only opened the mirrors on Reflection Day, but Stellan would pull a few strings, not only for Elzar, but for himself too. They had a lot to learn together, especially now. "How are they doing that?" Vern asked as the Nihil ships vanished into hyperspace altitudes that should have torn them apart. "We'll find out," Stellan promised his former Padawan, thinking of the data that had been rescued from the sunken Innovator. Vam Targes' legacy would be assured, Stellan had no doubt. He led them down into the clouds, the drift feathering out into a standard V formation. "Stop as many ships from leaving as possible. We want prisoners to question." "And their leaders?" Nib asked. "If the Force wills it, the sight of the D-woman chasing after the Rue played across his memory. Support the Jedi on the ground and join them if necessary." Burry mewed his understanding. "Oh, and Vernestra," Stellan added, unable to resist. "Yes, Stellan. Try to keep your vector in one piece. We will, Imri replied on behalf of his master. I'm glad to hear it, Padawan Kantaros. He felt a playful nudge in the force, pleased to know that Vernestra had taken his teasing in the spirit it had been meant. He had complete faith in her, despite her ever-increasing reputation for wrecking ships. Talk about history repeating. Zelzar never failed to remind him, Stellan hadn't been a natural pilot back when they were Padawans. Thankfully, some things improved with age. He dipped down, the drift following to emerge in the middle of a downpour. Smoke was billowing up from a base far below them, a gargantuan battlecruiser hovering above the devastation. Where in Typhon's name did the Nihil get their ships? Lorna glanced behind her as she raced for her shuttle. The Jedi fighters were sweeping in low, skimming the treetops as they prepared to fire. She'd already given the word to abandon the base. There was no way they could win this fight, not now. Most of her Tempests had already scattered, taking to the Pathol. Great, if not another Tempest runner would be found. That survived was the way of it. Ro probably already had a list of sycophants to choose from, was going up. Not that the eyes seemed to care that his precious base in flames. The gaze electric hung in the air in front of them, its guns silent. Why wasn't Ro responding? The gaze had weapons capable of targeting an ant from high orbit. A handful of vectors shouldn't have been a problem, and yet Ro was holding back. Was it another test to see who survived? Maybe if he'd backed the wrong Fathier. Maybe if he should have sided with Pen. It was academic now. Pen was dead, but she was very much alive and intended to stay that way. Treacherous witch. For a moment, Lorna thought that she'd been wrong, that it was Pan, back from Cyclor to take his revenge. But it wasn't the Dawotan who lunged at her from behind a power generator, but the slithering bulk of Quinn Amaranth that dropped on her with such speed that she slipped, falling beneath him. Believed in you. He twisted, attempting to throw him off, the lamproid's stinger striking the ground beside her. That was too close. Amaranth's remaining pincers cut through her armor, digging deep. Lorna cried out in pain, one hand holding his heavy head back, her arm locked. Lights flashed to her right. A vector was coming in from the direction of the gaze, close to the ground, its lasers churning up the ground toward them. Lorna rolled, taking Amaranth with her. The lamproid screamed as his body was ripped apart by the vector's fire, his thick coils providing just enough defense as the vector screamed past. Lorna kicked out, pushing Amaranth's pulped remains from her, and scrambled up, one thought in her mind. She needed to get on that shuttle, to firing on him as Loden tumbled from the open hatch. The sudden flare of the laser followed by blazing heat. He must have thrown himself to deck at the last minute, his armor saving his life. Not that it mattered. All that mattered was that he'd survived. He looked up to see his father's ruined face leering down at him. You think you're so clever, so unstoppable, indomitable Martian, indestructible Martian. You have no idea how weak you are. Ro grabbed one of the cables, pulling himself up. Weak or not, he had no time for ghosts. He stumbled ahead, grabbing the edge of the hatch to stop himself pitching forward. His breath rasped within his helmet. The heat from the lasers must have scored his lungs. No matter. What he saw was so much worse. The camp lay in ruins, fires burning on the ground. And within the smoke, the accursed flash of plasma blades. One in particular caught his eye, wielded by a dark-skinned Jedi far below, little more than a boy. He was engaged in a fight with two lowly strikes, batting back their blaster bolts, while beside him stood... No, it could not be. Loden Greystorm fought alongside the young Jedi, his lightsaber back in his hands, the lightsaber that by rights belonged to Ro. How could the Twi'lek be alive after everything they'd done to him? Why wouldn't he break? That is why you should fear them, his father whispered in his ear. They are indomitable. They are unstoppable. We shall see, Ro rasped, his voice loud in his helmet. He reached beneath his cloak, pulling the artifacts he had gathered, the first from his father's treasures, the second from the Karvashark ruins. Finally, with time to put his prize to the test, the leveler had proved powerful. Ro laughed. This is why your dead father and I live. This is not the end. It is only the beginning. He brought the two halves together, twisting them until they attached, forming a rod that hadn't been seen for generations. His father screamed, but Ro wasn't listening, not anymore. He could almost feel the leveler baying deep within the gaze. How hungry it would be, after all those years unable to move, frozen deep beneath Riston. Now it would feed. His hands shaking with anticipation, Ro pressed a button on his chest plate. Deep beneath him a trap sprang free with a resounding clang. The artifact glowed brighter than ever, calling the leveler, guiding its path as it bounded from its cage, flaws clattering on the deck plates, breath ragged and guttural. Ro stepped toward the hatch, the wind catching his cloak. He watched the Jedi cleaning up the camp, Loden and his apprentice, the vectors twisting in the sky. Look at you all, he wheezed. So noble, so brave. You have no idea what's coming. Chapter 75. Greasel, that's her, master. That's the Nihil commander. Lorna D was running for a waiting shuttle, her Leku trailing behind her. Loden looked confused. She's the Nihil commander, but I thought. Bell didn't give him time to complete his sentence, breaking into a run to intercept the woman. We can't let her get away. Bell felt like laughing, even in the midst of such chaos. This was the way it was meant to be, back with his master, his real master. He meant no disrespect to Indira Stokes. She'd taught him well, but now Loden was back. The two of them would stand together now, Bell supporting Loden, helping him recover. The scars would heal, even his Leku could be replaced with cybernetic parts. Bell would nurse Loden back to his full strength, just as the Force had planned all along. Bell, Loden wheezed as they ran into the cluster of docked ships. You go ahead. I can't keep up, Ember whimpered, as Loden stumbled, his lightsaber spluttering out. Bell spun around, catching him before he could fall. Star Wars, The Rising Storm 421. No, we can do this together. Bell pressed his forehead against. Loden's own. Do you hear me? The Force is strong. Loden fought for breath. The Force is strong. Yes. You're right. Engines fired behind them. Bell looked up, seeing a shuttle rising. From its pad. Bee's on that ship. I know it. Then we must stop her. Loden pushed himself, raising a shaking hand in the direction of the shuttle's thrusters. Bell mirrored the movement, reaching out with, The Force. The Force is strong, he repeated. Loden nodded. And so are we. Marchion Ro watched as Lorna's ship stalled in the air as if it had been caught in a tractor beam, its engines straining. He could imagine her behind the controls, cursing as she realized there was no escape. The Jedi have her, Marcion. See their power. Fear them. Pity them, he wheezed. He tapped the side of his helmet, opening a vid stream on his heads-up display. What are you seeing? What you never could, Ro told the figment of his imagination. Utterson grafted a cam onto its back. Then he's a fool. You're a fool. Tell that to the leveler. Ro watched the cam feed, seeing corridors he recognized not far away. He could hear it now, growling, bestial, insatiable. For a second, Ro saw himself in the cam as the leveler tore into the airlock, but the creature didn't want him. He stepped back as it rushed past, then, howling, leapt from the ship, grinned as he realized what was holding it tight. Bell was on the ground, Loden Greatstorm beside him. They were struggling, the act of stopping the shuttle no mean task, but they were together again. The universe had been put right. Something caught his eye on the edge of the battlecruiser. It was the open hatch he'd blasted, no doubt saving Loden's life in the process. Unbelievably, the figure in the armor was still standing, but for a split second, Elzar thought he saw something else. Something hunkered down on all fours, throwing itself from the airlock. Elzar's vision flared. Suddenly he wasn't in the vector anymore. He was back on Starlight, writhing on the floor as images of the future tore through his brain. He cried out in confusion, unwittingly pushing down on the flight stick. Why was the Force punishing him like this? The prediction had come true, at least part of it. The Nihil had all but razed Valo to the ground, killing thousands in the process. It was over. It was done, wasn't it? Elzar's vector plunged nose first into the ground below. The explosion, whatever it was, rumbled beneath Bell's feet. It might as well have been a planet away for all he cared. He was focused on the shuttle, staring into the blazing rockets, the glare burning deep into his retinas. He could feel Lorna D's frustration as her ship bucked and lurched in the sky, but she wouldn't get away. They would stop her. Loden and Bell Tog. The world shifted. The ground was gone, the shuttle too, the sky screaming away to a riot of impossible colors. Bell was falling, but there was no one to catch him. He thought he heard a voice. His name screamed in terror. The words bent in on themselves, echoing back and forth, losing all. He hit something hard. Pain blazed across his cheek, but he didn't recognize the sensation. He didn't know anything anymore. He didn't know his name or where he was. He barely knew what he was. Mist swirled around him, filling his chest, his skull, his soul. It was thicker than any war cloud, denser than any fog, and there were teeth inside, teeth and claws and eyes and death. So many eyes, so much death. The thing in the mist was everywhere at once, running, tearing, chasing him down, and there was nothing he could do, nowhere he could hide. It ripped through him, consuming everything he thought he was and everything he had yet to become. It was uncontrollable, a horror beyond name or understanding, and it was hungry. So very, very hungry. Bell reached out for the Force, but it had gone the of-the-ground way in the sky. He was alone, and he was powerless. All he could do was scream and scream and scream. Chapter 76. Grizal. Released from the Jedi's grip, Lorna D's shuttle shot into the clouds. Ro didn't notice it leave. He was staring at the images from the cam, unable to believe what he was seeing. Unable to breathe. It had been worth it. All of it. The nights hunched over his father's texts, the days scouring the stars searching for the relics of a forgotten time. Now the real work began. Even his father was finally silent. He knew what his son had achieved, what he couldn't, what he'd been too afraid to try. Ro twisted the cylinder, calling the leveler home. That wasn't its name, of course, only what Kufa had called it. The poor deluded hag. She had no idea what she had been guarding all those years, that she'd squandered. Power. But Ro did. And soon so would everyone else. The Nihil were gone. The camp was silent. No more blasters, no more battle cries. Above him, 4 vectors streaked after the warship, which wouldn't catch it, even as it streaked away into nothing, making an impossible jump. But the Nihil wouldn't be able to run forever. Of that, he was sure. It was only a matter of time until they discovered the Nihil's secret, how they twisted hyperspace in ways the Republic couldn't fathom. That day was coming, but for now he had other concerns. Stellan had landed the moment he saw Elzar's vector go down, a wave of anguish erupting from the cockpit. Now, Stellan was racing toward the burning craft, his heart hammering until he realized that Ty Yorick was pulling a figure from the wreckage, a figure that wasn't moving. Elzar. Ty looked up at Stellan's shout. "He's alive," she said as he dropped to his knees beside them. Stellan pressed his hand against Elzar's chest. He couldn't feel a heartbeat. Stellan pulled back a fist, slamming it down above Elzar's heart over and over. "Come on," he yelled at his oldest friend. "You're not finished yet. Do you hear me? You're not finished." Elzar convulsed, coughing. Stellan sank back on his legs. Thank the Force. "Elzar, can you hear me? Elzar!" "Shouting at him won't help," Ty said. "She's right," Elzar wheezed. "It won't." Stellan wanted to pull Elzar close to him, but had no idea the full extent of his injuries. "Thought I'd lost you." Elzar's flickered open eyes, and he reached up and grabbed Stellan's arm, leaving a bloody mark on his sleeve. "I thought it was over, Stell. I thought it was finished, but it's not. They're coming, Stellan. They're coming, and we can't stop them." Elzar's body shook as he was racked by another coughing fit. He'd inhaled a lot of smoke. I'm surprised he's still with us. He's stubborn. Aren't you, Elzar? Hey. Elzar slumped in Ty's arms, his eyes rolling up into their sockets. Stellan reached for his neck. There was a pulse, weak but there all the same. He would pull through. Stellan would make sure of that. Master Gios, come in, please. Indira's voice made him start. He pulled his hand away from Elzar, activating his comlink. Stellan here. What is it, Indira? You need to see for yourself. Indira was as pale as a ghost when he found her standing in the middle of a group of abandoned shuttles. Stellan could feel anxiety rolling off her in spades. What in the light's name could have happened to take a Jedi as experienced as Indira Stokes? She looked up before he could ask. It's Bell. What is? She nodded to a gap between the shuttles. See for yourself. Stellan squeezed past the ships, thinking that nothing could be as bad as what he had seen on Valo. Once again, the universe proved him wrong. Bel Zettifar was curled up in a ball, sobbing gently, Ember standing guard. The Charhound's hackles rose as Stellan approached. She snarled, flames flashing behind her teeth. Stellan raised a hand to ward off the animal. It's okay, girl. It's me. Ember's growl turned into a bark. Indira was behind him now. She pointed beyond the traumatized Padawan to a lump of rock that Stellan hadn't even noticed. The battlefield was strewn with rubble. Well, it was one more rock among the devastation. But this one was different, its shape strangely familiar. 2 legs, a head twisted to the side, features frozen into a scream. Elzar's words echoed through his mind. They're coming, Stellan. They're coming, and we can't stop them. He took an uncertain step forward. I think it's Loden. He was on that ship. Bell sensed it. I sensed it, but then Stellan bent down beside the petrified body, seeing the line of a noble brow on the rock, the line of ragged Jedi robes. He reached out a trembling finger and brushed what had once been Loden Greatstorm's feet. The face collapsed in on itself, the entire husk crumbling to dust before his eyes, and for the first time since he was a child, Stellan Gios was afraid. Acknowledgements. 30 years ago, 2 books blew my mind. The first was Dark Empire by Tom Veitch and Cam Kennedy, published by Dark Horse Comics, while the second was Heir to the Empire by Timothy Zahn, published then by Bantam Spectra. I remember seeing them in the stores and not quite believing my eyes. Here were new stories set in my beloved Star Wars galaxy. Both took me on a journey that led me ultimately to write this book. So first and foremost, I want to say thank those pioneering creators. Without you building so wonderfully on George Lucas's original vision, we wouldn't be here working on the High Republic 3 decades later, you two. Which brings me to the Rising Storm. There are so many people to thank, primarily Michael Siglin, Lucasfilm Publishing's creative director and Project Luminous's very own Nick Fury. Thank you for inviting me on this adventure of a lifetime and for guiding our ship as we navigated this new corner of the galaxy. Thanks also to my fellow Lumineers, Claudia Gray, Justina Ireland, Daniel Jose Older, and Charles Soule, and also the creators I've been working with on my other High Republic projects, Ario, Mark, Ariana, Annalisa, Mark P., and Tom over on the Marvel series, and Rachel and Guido on Monster of Temple Peak, all of whom coped with me when I was juggling novel, comic series, and graphic novel, and who all